interlopers destroyed all that we knew and loved in the Night of 1,000 Tears.
What's up, MetaNerds? In this video, we'll be using every source available to fully understand the infamous primary bomber of the Empire. The TIE SA, for Surface Assault, was one of the principal triad of TIE craft serving the Galactic Empire, two cousins being the TIE Fighter and TIE Interceptor. Designed from its inception as a dedicated bomber variant, the TIE Bomber featured an internal ordnance bay capable of carrying a vast range of munitions for surface and space targets, details which we'll get to in a bit. Navy, Army, and Stormtrooper forces could all call upon the TIE Bomber to provide devastating fire support to any target in any environment. Designed and manufactured by the legendary Sinar Fleet Systems in order to replace the lighter TIE GT. As you'd expect, it's built around the eponymous twin-ion engines. This propulsion system, the PS4 twin-ion engines, was known for its simplicity and reliability, with no moving parts, which made it very low maintenance while lightening the craft overall and improving maneuverability. Its reliability was further enhanced by sharing numerous components with others in its family, including the cockpit, wing brace, laser armament, and drive system. Unlike complex, high-technology craft like the Rebel X-Wing, TIEs were usually combat-ready at a moment's notice. There was also no hyperdrive or dedicated shields, two of the most complex and expensive components for any craft, but this lightened the logistical and monetary strain on this series. On the other hand, it made the TIE Bombers dependent on a mothership to bring them in between systems. But that's not really an issue, as the Imperial flag reigned across the galaxy. The bombers did not even include landing gear, just another component meant to lighten the craft and extend its range. Instead, they would be typically docked in suspended gantries, with their pilots boarding through a dorsal hatch. And for maintenance and servicing, the bombers would be cycling through moving launch racks to a separate space where they would be refilled and rearmed, before being moved combat-ready back into the flight bay. And while they were structurally capable of sitting on their wings, this would strain the craft's frame. And Imperial pilots were conditioned to rely on specialized facilities, which also had the psychological effect of making sure they didn't feel independent. But all these cost and weight-saving measures did lead to many disadvantages. Without a hyperdrive, the TIE Bomber could not be used to conduct out-of-system strikes. Without shields, the bomber was punishing to fly, as one mistake could leave the craft crippled or destroyed by an enemy fighter. But of course, Sinar's design bore fruit in the area where it was intended, increasing maneuverability. The TIE Bomber boasted a stunningly impressive rating of 86 DPF, making it 45% more agile than its counterpart, the BTLB Y-Wing, and only 14% slower than the viciously nimble TIE Interceptor. Perhaps most impressively, the TIE SA was 15% more agile than the X-Wing, enabling it to theoretically outmaneuver the queen of Rebel fighter craft. And speed-wise, the TIE Bomber performed adeptly with a maximum speed of 80 megalights, identical to its Y-Wing counterpart, and not too far behind the 100 megalight speed of the TIE Fighter and X-Wing. Laden with ordnance, however, the TIE SA was a plodding snubcraft, managing only a 60 megalight speed fully loaded. So they're somewhat banking on a surprise attack, delivering all their ordnance, and then making a more speedy retreat as other Imperial forces flood in. Its atmospheric performance was slightly worse compared to in a vacuum, with a max atmospheric speed of 850 km per hour, slightly slower than the B-Wing and X-Wing, as the blunt, solar panel wings of the craft slowed it considerably in yawning maneuvers, though still decent ability to pitch and roll, as these angled solar wings, built to increase durability, ironically made the TIE Bomber slightly better suited to turning in atmosphere than its TIE Fighter stablemate. Now that speed and maneuverability are out of the way, let's get to the part you've all been waiting for, the firepower. The most notable feature of the TIE SA is its twin pod design, with the port pod solely reserved for ordnance. A series of 3 independently rotating weapon rings carry a wide variety of munitions, racked and loaded by an internal maneuvering arm as the pilot selected his choice of ordnance. The potential payload could include one or a tailored mixture of proton bombs, proton torpedoes, guided concussion missiles, simple thermal detonators, or orbital mines up to a weight of 15 metric tons. 2 of the internal weapon rings carried spherical ordnance such as the proton bombs and mines, fed into a bomb chute for vertical delivery, while the third was dedicated to missile armament and fired directly forward. Bomber squads could perform a wide variety of space or ground tasks, from seeding space with orbital mines to precision bombing of ground targets to delivering devastating volleys of concussion missiles against enemy fighter formations. The bomber had a reputation for precise delivery of firepower, delivering a tailored payload where the immolation of an ISD's orbital bombardment might be a tad excessive. And for those first 19 years of the Empire, might get those pesky civilian and senatorial critics talking. But precision is still a relative term though, as a squadron of 12 or a wing of 72 could very well flatten an entire town, borough, or installation with carpet bombing. For more specialty missions, the TIE SA could also carry thousands of dispersible pamphlets to weaken enemy morale, flip a rebellious population back to supporting the Emperor, or supply canisters to resupply isolated Imperial forces. As with other TIE cousins, the bomber's ion engines made an eerie howl passing overhead. A sound of hope for Imperial troopers, and a terrifying banshee call for rebels. In the heavily jammed electronic battle scene in the galaxy far, far away, electronic warfare systems were crucial for the success of the TIE bomber, and it came well equipped with a dedicated EMP generator mounted between the twin pods and used to short out a target's defensive electronic systems. This, coupled with a SFS TS-7B targeting computer, ensured that launched missiles and bombs reached their target. For ground strike missions, the TIE SA's Nordoxicom bomb site ensured reasonable precision, whether from close runs or high altitude. For self-defense, the TIE SA also carried a pair of SFS LS-1 laser cannons mounted on the chin of the pilot pod, identical to those carried aboard the TIE fighters. And so even though it was a bit slower overall, those laser cannons could still be equally deadly against unlucky rebel flyers. But of course, relative to the fighter or interceptor, those were rarely used, as they were forward fixed, and so most of the time it was better to just try and escape, not turn around and engage the forces that were following you after your bombing. Most would just try and get back to their carrier as quick as possible. Later TIE variants intended for bombings like the TIE Aggressor would include a turret similar to the Y-Wing, to at least offer some protection to its aft quarter. The TIE line has an infamous reputation for fragility, but in the case of the TIE SA, a variety of design features led to an increased, although frankly still not too good, durability. The entire craft was bulkier and reinforced not only to handle a heavy bomb load, but also to absorb the backblast of their own detonating munitions. Like others in the line, the TIE bomber's hull was made with titanium alloy, reinforced with quadanium steel armor. Its hull was rated as 3 times more durable than that of the standard TIE, although it was somewhat weaker than the Y or X-Wings. Unlike most other TIE variants, the bombers actually included life support for its pilot, although they still wore the complete flight suit as a matter of course in case of damage or destruction. While these features increased survivability, the TIE SA pilot really could only expect to survive when ejecting in atmosphere. Its relative slowness compared to the rest of the TIE line, combined with its lack of shields, made it easy prey alone. The X-Wing pilots referring to the unfortunate craft as dupes. An Imperial doctrine called for TIE squadrons to be escorted by other fighters and interceptors. But of course the bomber squadrons were the ones most targeted, and they suffered significant casualties in the face of determined resistance. Its chief asset, its maneuverability, could only be used if the bombers broke off their straight-line attack runs, which in essence would mean that the TIEs failed their mission, even if the crafts themselves survived. Due to this disincentivation and the strict discipline of Imperial pilots, the TIE SA rarely got to showcase the impressive agility that, in theory, was the craft's most survivable feature. The TIE SA hull would be used to spawn a number of sub-variants, the most directly related of which is the TIE boarding shuttle. This model replaced the munitions in the starboard pod, with seating for a dozen personnel for boarding operations. Other variants included the triple pod TIE Heavy Bomber and quadruple pod TIE Punisher. And during the grinding rebel reconquest of the galaxy, this bomber became increasingly outdated, moving from a serviceable if somewhat unprotected bomber to a nearly obsolete and vulnerable craft. Designs such as the Scimitar Assault Bomber, approved by Grand Admiral Thrawn, would remedy the situation, keeping the TIE line viable and lethal. And stay tuned as we expect to have all these variants get their own video in the future. And unlike some craft, the TIE bomber is virtually identical in legends and canon sources. In fleet engagements, TIE bombers served a crucial role as part of an Imperial commander's arsenal. Typical complement of Imperial Star Destroyers would include 72 TIEs, split across 6 squadrons, one squadron of which would be TIE SAs. Battle TIE bombers could deliver firepower beyond the reach of ISD turbolasers, or supplement the ship's assault at close range with ion or proton torpedoes. The ISD was also vulnerable to attacks in its rear quarter, with most of its heavy guns positioned to fire forward or in broadsides. TIE bombers filled this gap, keeping pesky rebel frigates or other warships from getting into such a position. As mentioned before, they could also be used for precise ground strikes, especially where the ISDs did not have a direct line of sight, such as on the far side of moons, or in rebel bases tucked away in hard-to-reach canyons, or other similar features. Among the TIE bombers' key moments in history, they hunted for the Millennium Falcon after the evacuation of Hoth, bombing the asteroid the freighter was hiding in an attempt to flush the wily smuggler out into the open. and fulfilled their more expected role in the famous off-screen battle, bombing the rebel base on Yavin 4 after the destruction of the first Death Star, inflicting serious damage in a small retribution for the major humiliation the rebels had caused. They also shredded the X7 factory station, responsible for manufacturing the TIE defenders of the rogue Grand Admiral Zarin, and perhaps most infamously, were used to deadly effect on the Mandalorian homeworld, reducing the capital of the most proud fighters in the galaxy to ash and rubble, and of course used extensively throughout the Galactic Civil War and beyond. As for its size, it was a chunky but compact boy, coming in smaller than both the TIE Fighter and TIE Interceptor. If one of these landed on Earth, it'd be about as long as an adult Malaysian reticulating python, or 2 medium sedans, and about as wide as a bowling lane is long. And Shaq's Illuminati clone standby could stand on his shoulders and just about touch the top of that wing, or a bit taller than both a Vulture droid and Tri-Fighter. That's it for its breakdown, but as for some cool facts and behind the scenes stuff, the bomber was actually designed for A New Hope, but it didn't make its way onto screen until Empire Strikes Back, with the TIE Shuttle compatriot first appearing in the cross-section of the Imperial Star Destroyer Devastator. The TIE has been an ever-popular model for LEGO sets, with several coming out over the years. And if you want to try it yourself, be sure to check out Empire at War and its mods, such as Thrawn's Revenge, as you could command the TIE SA, TIE Heavy Bomber, Punisher, and Scimitar. Funny enough, the power plant listed for the TIE Bomber, which I specifically didn't mention until here, is the same IA-2B reactor which propels Imperial Star Destroyers. And so while it's possible Sinar used the same name for 2 different types of reactors, it's more likely that this is just a continuity error. So what do you think? Were you surprised at some of the features of the TIE Bomber? Or do you still think the rebels were right in just calling them dupes? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Please hit that like button, it's the best way to help me out. Subscribe if you want to see more and check out these videos. But most important of all, remember, when you hear that TIE Bomber howl, it's already too late to change your allegiance. So hopefully the Force will be with you, always. What's up, MetaNerdz? This video will be a complete breakdown of one of the most iconic ships in all of Star Wars. Definitely a CIS beauty, the Munificent class star frigate, and we'll be pulling from every resource available. First, the context of its creation. What the fall of the Republic era is so great at showing is a political science truth that laws are enforced by weapons. Everyone from my dad to Enlightenment philosophers, the founding fathers of America, to the famous Mao quote that goes, "Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun." The Republic forgot this, since as long as the Old Republic era with the Ruusan reformations that demilitarized the galaxy because they felt that they had finally defeated evil by defeating the Sith. Well, of course, they didn't even defeat all the Sith, nor were the Sith only ones capable of committing violence. And this combination of silliness allowed the secret Sith in hiding to slowly guide the corruption of the galaxy. But as much as the Jedi would love to blame the yellow-eyed boogeymen and women of the dark side, simple sins like greed and anger naturally gave rise to all the sorts of crime that existed long before the Sith. Ironically, Coruscant itself had some of the most entrenched criminal areas, but as a general rule, the further from the core, the less fear you had of law enforcement, and the succession of planets that we see in the CIS had been building up for a millennia. As the core relied more and more on trade from the Mid and Outer Rim worlds, you see the Republic having to allow the megacorp conglomerates like the Trade Federation to defend themselves. Because the Republic decided that a military was evil, but they lived in a universe that required physical violence to stop even greater evils, they end up ever increasing the amount of weaponry that these companies could manufacture and deploy. So with every century, the Republic became weaker, and the criminals and corporations got stronger. Because of course, the crime lords would be able to take over some facilities, hijack some ships, and now the corporations needed more weapons to fight off the thugs using their old blasters and gunships. While Republic politicians sat back and allowed this power creep to take place in the criminals and corporations. Horus Keshel Drive was one of the oldest ship manufacturers in the galaxy, existing at least since 4000 BBY, and owned by Neimoidian investors. It would legally produce all the weapons we see on the Lucrehulk, since it was intended to just be an enormous cargo ship. The droid starfighters were accepted too, and it was actually the ground force that was more problematic, seen correctly as more in line with an invasion force, which of course is what we saw during the Boo, but even that was in a gray area because it could be used to defend planetary facilities. Pirate empires across the galaxy were known for massacres, so even the Republic did allow corporations to have ground forces, and even applaud the moral choice of going with droid forces. Since this way, the Republic citizens, those employees working at the countless Trade Federation facilities at every step from mining to manufacturing, these people would not be killed in defense. It was droid ships and vehicles. No Republic citizen killed in a tank or starfighter even on defense, while you are taking out the evil criminals. so it was a great deal for the Republic in a way. But of course, the core was starting to get nervous, as much as people like to play pretend, they all did understand that political power did extend from the barrel of a blaster, and now all those blasters were in private hands, manufactured in areas of the galaxy far from Coruscant, with their own self-sufficient economic ecosystem. It's not an exaggeration to say that this is one of the worst approaches to violence I've ever heard of. Normal citizens, even wealthy individuals, if you weren't in that sector, were not allowed to have access to the terrible implements of war. There was no proper military, just the judicial authority, and of course the Jedi Order had weapons and vehicles, but even they had to rely on the Trade Federation to save them during the Stark Hyperspace War just 12 years before Naboo. The only people with access to what we would think of as military-grade ships and vehicles were the crime lords and ultra-wealthy entities in the military-industrial complex, which often overlooked does include the banks. The Munificent and Requisite were manufactured by Horus Kessel Drive for the banking clan. They safeguarded the clan's private communications network and enforced control over indebted worlds, transported crucial financial assets, and protected vast treasure vaults. Equipped with hyperwave transceivers and advanced communication arrays, the Munificents were essential to the clan's operations, enabling secure galactic financial transactions. And we can see these transceivers here on the wings, with the energy cells that store power for them over here, and the cells being fed by these lines that run along here, pulling from the main reactor located up here, which is said to annihilate up to 2,300 tons of fuel per second. That might sound impossible, but it has to do with the super dense state of that fuel which is being used. Of course, there's a little hand waviness going on here, but in general, think of the idea of how a cubic foot of osmium weighs about 1,402 pounds, while a cubic foot of water would only be 62 pounds. In the galaxy far, far away, there is a fuel source with an even more dramatically heavy density, and that's what's being used to power most of the capital ships. After the banking clan aligned with the Confederacy, Chairman Sandhill dedicated a fleet of these frigates to the Separatist cause, and during the Clone Wars, the Munificent class became a cornerstone of the Confederate Navy, with tens of thousands entering service. These ships were marked with the blue and white Confederate emblem and paint scheme, though many also retain the banking clan's signature green stripes alongside Confederate colors. It shows their dual allegiance. At a length of 825 meters, or 2,706 feet, it was nearly 70% the length of the Venator, while at a width of 426 meters, or 1,397 feet, made it more than twice the Providence, and its height of 243 meters, or 797 feet, made it stand taller than 10 AT-ATs. Its max acceleration of 2300 G makes it significantly slower than the Providence and the Venator, though its hyperdrive is relatively impressive, being a Class 1, which is the fastest that these mass-produced ships usually get. And the 150,000 light-year effective range means it could cross the galaxy and come back again halfway before needing fuel. The hyperdrive unit is located at the top of this tower, which is rather exposed. Its crew is usually only 200 organics, which for comparison, the Imperial Star Destroyers were always around 40,000. That's 200 times the crew, and it's said they achieved this by having a lot of automation, having droid brains operating the ship, while itself was also packed with 150,000 deactivated battle droids, which is probably higher than the original amount that was packed in here to fight off pirate attacks. And it really points to the scale of warfare. It's something we sadly don't see too often, but taking command of one of these ships would be like a mini campaign in of itself. With an invasion force that could take and secure certain parts of the ship, fighting over days or weeks, with these capital ships being city-sized craft with dozens to hundreds of levels or decks. And the closest thing we see to this is how Ringo Vinda operated like a planetary invasion, just due to how vast it was. So 150,000 battle droids spread all over the ship, while most of the crew were in these habitable areas toward the bow. Frighteningly placed right over the main gun, but maybe like I mentioned in the Praetor Mark II vid, the crew should not be in these crew areas during combat, so they'd be off at their stations, allowing the crew area to act like a crumple zone, something that could be hit and not damage anything important in the heat of combat, because the main areas to hit are the bridge, power core, and the main guns. In total, there are 2 heavy turbolaser cannons that really are being too modest. Their critique is that they are slow to maneuver, but these are like massive artillery pieces compared to a tank. And they're just called heavy because that's a catch-all term for stronger than normal turbolasers. The twin turbolaser cannon was powerful enough to melt an ice moon measuring 1,000 kilometers in diameter, or pierce the shields of a 10-kilometer wide Grade 3 battle station. We don't have a lot of other stats to compare that to, but that's given to us to show that these are exceptionally strong weapons. Qualitatively different from something else that might also be called heavy. Think about like video game logic, it would be like a sniper compared to a rifle or even DMR. And that applies for my favorite weapons on any ship. This thing has 2 long-range ion cannons. The ion weaponry is the most overlooked, but if you can turn a ship off, you win. And you have the option to take prisoners and ships intact. It gives you far more options, and funny enough, you can see the Mune's philosophy going into the design concept of this ship, wanting to stay far away from actual combat and manipulate the battlefield from a distance. But knowing that during the war these would be in the thick of it, there are also 26 twin turbolaser cannons, 20 light turbolaser turrets, and 38 point defense cannons, some of which we can see along this ridge, tucked right underneath this sloping, thick armor plating, and the light ones are up top here, with some point defense focused in on the towers to protect these crucial systems. Though some iterations would up it to 40 point defense, 8 medium flak guns and a hyperwave jammer. The long-range heavy cannons and ion cannons, combined with the hyperwave jammer, makes this frigate a surprisingly specialized sort of capital ship assassin. And the increase in point defense and flak means that the Republic was doing a great job with their starfighters and bomber runs, anchored by the powerful ARC-170s, because we normally think of the overwhelming droid fighter swarms of the CIS. On here, the official complement is very low, reporting 12 to 36 starfighters and 12 landing craft. But it could be hundreds if not thousands of vultures because, as this snippet explains, because the automated droid brain tech allowed it to be so relatively spacious and hollowed out, giving it a skeletal appearance especially in the requisite, so they could host numerous starfighters in these spacious hull cavities. Covering all of its surface, at least when you're in space, if you're worried about that weight and movement would be bad in atmosphere. And we get a glimpse of this during the Battle of Coruscant, though it does mention that if the shields go down, none of these sections are covered by hull armor, and so they're extremely vulnerable. And just a small detail, I love that the Munificent's ray shield generator is located at the rear. It just works perfectly with the long-range capabilities of this ship, that it can be facing the target, projecting that shield to the front, and either stunning or destroying an enemy from far away. Some other details to point out before its history is that it can also accommodate 850 troops and support staff. And there were occasions where these troops and the 150,000 droids on board were used as boarding parties to take over Venators, and of course deploy planetside. Its cargo capacity was 40,000, which is about 50,000 dewbacks, while the docking rings line this area and could take vessels, but also just leave the craft attached to work as an external storage when it was in peacetime, and when it was moving around the actual rare materials that back the credits issued by the banking clan. The command tower of Munificent-class starship was situated at the bow, slanting diagonally upward toward the main structure. Within the tower, a turbolift shaft linked the various operational stations, while each level featured wide, panoramic windows, offering a clear view of the surrounding space. While the bridge, designed with minimal equipment, featured a series of terminals arranged across multiple ascending tiers, forming a pyramid-like structure. At the apex, the ship's commander took position, flanked by an operator on either side. In this entire command tower structure is where most of the 200 crew would be, calling on the original function as being essentially a secure internet router with dedicated to online banking that could fire on anyone at a long distance, eliminating all threats to the flow of galactic trade. During the Clone Wars, the Munificent class played a critical role in guiding and coordinating Confederate ships operating deep within enemy territory. They provided escort and support to key Separatist operations, including assaults on interstellar holonet relays, designed to undermine the morale and communications of Galactic Republic forces. Leveraging their advanced antenna, the frigates broadcast anti-Republic propaganda, while their jamming devices disrupted enemy sensors, targeting systems, and distress signals. And it's one of the most interesting aspects of this ship, that it went from playing such a crucial role in galactic trade to having a serious propaganda effect in the Clone Wars. It's not as flashy as explosions, but many Republic officials knew that the #1 threat to the war was the public's opinion of it. And the Munificent played a key role in making sure that the Republic sensors did not have complete control of the holonet. And following Admiral Trench's defeat by the prototype cloak vessel, most of these ships underwent refits during the war, enhancing their sensors to even detect cloaked or massive objects, relying on the actual warping of spacetime. As the war drew to a close, thousands of these frigates participated in the climactic Battle of Coruscant, showing how integral they were to the Confederacy's fleet. After the Clone Wars, many Munificent-class frigates and their crew fled beyond the reach of the Galactic Empire, ironically turning to piracy or mercenary work, offending their munificent ancestors. Some eventually found their way into the Rebel Alliance, where they were heavily modified, often to the extent that their original designs became almost unrecognizable. So that's it for the breakdown, and as for behind the scenes facts, Munificent means a gift or sum of money, which is larger or more generous than normal. It's going above and beyond, much like the lore of this ship. The concept art for the ship wanted it to be organic and rounded, making a stark contrast to the sleek, triangular aesthetics of the Galactic Republic and Imperial ships, and some people think that there's a strong resemblance to Mon Calamari cruisers. And the banking clan comm ship that we see in Battlefront 2 did significantly change its look. Truncated version of this. Officially, you could say that they're like different versions, but really they're meant to be the same ship. If you want to read more on it yourself, check out the Essential Guide to Warfare, the complete cross-sections, and starships of the galaxy. Please hit that like button, it really is the best way to help me out. Comment your thoughts and suggestions, subscribe to see more, and check out these videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, don't let the Senate tell you what you can look up on the HoloNet, and the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, MetaNerdz? This video will break down one of the most unique looking, massive, and underrated ships. It captured what might be the most rare species in the galaxy, and turned the rebels into the genocidal maniacs for once. The Praetor Mark II class battlecruiser. This thing has amazing real-world lore. If you don't know, Fractal Sponge created tons of renders, some of ships that are mentioned or vaguely shown in backgrounds of things like comics, and LucasArts reached out and licensed them and incorporated many of these designs into guidebooks of all sorts. The creator of these renders does have a different vision of many of the details of this ship, which I want to include towards the end. That might sound messed up since he made it, but the details from the Age of Rebellion RPG guide are more fleshed out, and we'll get into its history, including the first time it appeared way back in 1977, the same year Star Wars was released, debuting in comic number 60. Then we'll get to the really interesting ways that Fractal Sponge visions differed from this. It was manufactured by Kuat Drive Yards at a cost of 700 million credits. This would make Thrawn faint, as it's the equivalent to 11,667 TIE fighters, and about 4.7 times the ISD. Its length was 4,800 meters, or 3 miles, making it 3 times the ISD, or you could line up 663 TIEs. Its hyperdrive was likely a Class 2 like most Imperial ships, and its armament is staggering. 60 quad-heavy turbolaser batteries, 40 twin medium turbolaser batteries, 10 twin long-range ion cannon batteries, 30 twin ion cannons, and 10 heavy tractor beam emitters. Note there are no torpedo tubes or missiles, as making your whole ship run off of just Tabana gas and the power from the fusion generator is a lot better for logistics. I have an old video on how refueling ships was always a thing in Star Wars. There was some outrage over some cannon fuel scene that I don't even remember, but things like refueling ships and stations and the importance of Bespin itself was always a part of the lore. Because although they do have fusion generators, which can have enormous energy outputs from very little material, there is still some material used. They're not perpetual motion machines. And since these capital ships use enormous power in everything from engines to guns and hyperspace travel, they can burn through even large stores of fuel for those fusion engines. For a comparison, think about how someone from the 1800s would think that future electric energy would only cost a few cents a month, since they couldn't think about just how power-hungry things are like air conditioning, your dryers, your Bitcoin mining station, and your gaming systems are. The most famous refueling ship is the Ultor class, and the largest station is Valaducia, and having this refueling network in place is also better than having tons of missile and torpedo shipments flying around the galaxy, ready to be picked off by rebels. Civilians would always need fuel stations no matter what, and of course that could be used to charge weaponry, but there's no getting around that. And the final reason for no missiles in most Imperial ships was that they wanted to capture rebels and pirates alive. So we always see a balance of ion weapons to take down shields, turbo lasers to leave it dead in the water, and tractor beams to capture it. And if you're thinking of the Victory class, that was a Clone Wars holdover. But I am hoping to break down my favorite exception to this rule, the insane torpedo sphere. It does have a complement in the form of 120 fighters, usually TIEs, and an unspecified number of shuttles, landing craft, and AT series walkers. I think this is just for backup, in the rare use case that this might be a single ship acting as the local Imperial fortress headquarters, not playing too much of an active role in patrolling a sector, but working with other units and acting as an unassailable hub that could get comms out and survive the most savage rebel hit and runs. These ships would emerge from this almost comically small and hidden area right in the bow. It's simple, 2 large hangars stacked on top of each other. And you see how it's recessed a bit, creating an effect of being protected by the dorsal and ventral tips towards the bow. So though it faces forward right into incoming fire, I think it's more protected than it seems. And just for rebels hoping to spawn camp, there are several guns surrounding this area. Also surprisingly well protected is the bridge. It has the roughly same T-shaped design, though if you look close it's more rounded and there are 2 levels stacked. But this whole superstructure surrounding it really removes most of the critiques of the overexposed bridge. And again, we see many turreted guns right alongside this area. Though it is odd that these dorsal ridges house the crew areas, with 109,000 crew members, including everything from janitors to gunners, officers, and pilots, while also being able to move 14,000 passengers. I admit it doesn't look important to the ship. It's not like it's an obvious place to draw fire, but when they target the bridge or the cylinder, it's a bit dark that the crew chambers would be hit. But this might actually be genius, because in every image of this thing you will see an antenna forest along some surface, so I don't think rebels would be able to easily sneak up on the Praetor. Meaning that once the klaxon blared, these sections would be empty. Everyone should be in their stations, which are deep inside the main body or up top on the bridge. And thus these ridges act like large crumple zones or a sacrificial layer that can absorb damage, and although it sounds bad that these are the crew quarters, really there shouldn't be anybody in here during combat. Now this large cylinder is called the transport ring. It was used to store enormous amounts of supplies, raw materials strip mined from worlds, special equipment, and even live specimens like the Teasel creature, which we'll get to in a sec with its history. Its height and length is 360 meters, while being 568 meters wide, so the volume of this big cargo tube is about 58 million cubic meters. To visualize this part, there is more than enough space to fit a pair of CR-90s back to back. You could stack that about 10 times and multiply that 11 times across. So roughly 220 CR-90s could be transported inside of this. Now I'm not sure why this wouldn't just be a massive rectangular shipping container. We see that style still used in the Class 4 container transport. And I do laugh at the idea of a bunch of these rolling away and resulting in an embarrassing Imperial massacre, racking up more kills than a rebel attack, when this enormous tube took out an entire support colony. But nonetheless, these were part of a modular design that these could be easily removed and swapped out, making the Praetor Mark II in a weird way not just a battlecruiser, but a glorified cargo ship, almost like a heavily armed and armored VIP transport. A single ship which wouldn't need an escort but release its own 120 fighters. It's harder to hit bridge, enormous energy in the shields, and tons of countermeasures, all would work to keep this cargo cylinder protected. Which, funny enough, there really aren't a lot of stats on this thing, even though it's one of the most unique aspects of the ship. That and the absurd combination of thruster clusters. Technically, these three are the main engines, the two up top and the one in the core of the middle. Then we get these two medium-sized ones, which are the same as many of these, but notice that there is a third small size. So in total that's 3 large, 38 medium, and 16 small, for a total of 57 thrusters in total. And this would all give it exceptionally fine control and maneuverability, though why it would need that is a puzzle. That may point to its use in cargo transport, needing to maneuver into the perfect spot to deliver the tube, but maybe it's just to have tons of redundancy to make sure that its cargo wasn't lost, suffering enormous hull damage, losing dozens of engines, and still being able to keep trucking through it. Maybe there's a certain amount needed to make sure that it can still jump to hyperspace, and this array of so many engines made it impossible to take them all out. Now in the comic, we do get excellent shots of the interior, which really gives you a sense of scale for how enormous this thing was. It's something that should be stressed with every capital ship. They are far larger than our space station. We are a long way off from making even one of these. We're in the galaxy far, far away. Each of these capital ships are essentially massive spacefaring cities. This scene also points to another much larger open area hangar, which is a pretty cool concept. It's like a football stadium just opening the roof to a massive area and letting the ships take off vertically. And I think that's what's trying to be shown here in this panel with this large black rectangular area here, even if it is drawn a bit oddly and not to scale. The Praetor Mark II was created early in the Galactic Empire's reign as an upgraded version of the Republic's Praetor-class star battlecruiser. However, only a few were ever built. Imperial strategies favored massive dreadnoughts over battlecruisers, which weren't as effective at instilling fear. And so the Praetor Mark II was in a weird spot, being bigger and more expensive than the Star Destroyers, but not scratching that massive project itch like the Super Star Destroyers. Because of this, most Mark IIs are stationed in key core worlds for defense, with very few sent on dangerous missions to the outer rim of the Empire, and they rarely left their posts unless a major battle was happening. Though we do have the case of the famous mission involving the Helmsman, the Mark II commanded by Admiral Mills Gill. The Helmsman led a secret fleet on a mission to transport a Teasel, a living creature used for hyperspace communication, with the goal of bringing it to Coruscant. This would have helped the Imperial Navy coordinate attacks against rebel forces, giving it a tech boon that no one else would be able to understand. And this creature was the only known member of its species. Deep within the far-off Valtha Divide is where they found the many-spined Teasel, also called a Screamer, where they realized that this non-sentient creature had a special ability to be able to send information instantaneously across the galaxy to any receiver, while also being able to block other communications by creating a psychic-like scream that disrupted signals, leaving only one clear channel open. and almost machine-like, it could be predictably manipulated by using an electronic prod. The only details they were able to get on a sort of biology is simply describing it as a huge blue oval with hundreds of white circles inside of its body. As Admiral Mills-Gill put it, quote, "The Teasel is a freak of nature, an organic communicator able to take electrically supplied information input and transmit it at the speed of light to any receptor in the galaxy." The helmsman carried the Teasel in a special transportation ring, but it wasn't long before the rebel Flying Bantha Squadron attacked the fleet during its journey, killing the Teasel, possibly marking the extinction of this species. The rebels had modified stolen TIE fighters to break through the helmsman's heavy armor and shields, and though the ship was damaged, it survived, and its gun batteries retaliated, though the attacking TIE managed to escape. Later, a Praetor Mark II participated in a fleet exercise alongside Super Star Destroyers and other large ships, where they were all refueled by a massive supply ship. The Thalassa was a Praetor Mark II under command of Admiral Sander Delvardus, who led the Eriadu Authority in breaking away from the Galactic Empire following the Battle of Endor. In 4 ABY, during the New Republic's campaign against Imperial warlords, a fleet of EF-76 Nebulon B escort frigates and BTL Y-wings engaged the Thalassa in the Majora system, where they were able to destroy the ship. Really interesting is that the Hoth ion cannon was powered by connecting to scavenged Praetor-class battlecruisers. Not the Mark II exactly, but that was something that I was reminded of by the creator of these 3D models when going through the fascinating comments under the art on his page. So here's where his vision of the ship differs a little. Bit from the official RPG guides. He imagined it with the firepower of 13 ISDs. It's not 13 times larger, but a sort of cube effect is happening as the surface area increases. And not about who produced it, he imagined it with different manufacturers. For one, I like to think Praetor is a CEC product, that's Corellian Engineering Corporation, or at least a collaborative of CEC KDY, Kuat Drive Yards, or Rendili KDY product. Bellator has a better acceleration, so there's already a big difference. Bellator can carry fighters and troops, at least much more than a Praetor, even if not all that impressive numbers for a hull that size. It's therefore more multi-role than a Praetor. He also says I have the count, but it depends on the scale of the ship. I built it as 6.4 kilometers, which would mean that it would outgun a Bellator by about 25% or so. The book pegged it at 4.8 kilometers, at which point it would be about half to 2/3 of the Bellator in firepower. The book mentioned there is where the art becomes canon in the Essential Guide to Warfare, a long way from the very first comic series way back in 1977. Now be sure to check out the art using the link down in the description and comments. Please hit that like button, it really is the best way to help me out. Comment suggestions, subscribe to see more, and check out these other videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, if you're an ultra rare species popping up in a random comic arc, you're probably going to go extinct in a few issues. And the Force will be with you, always. What's up, MetaNerds? In this video, we're going to be taking an in-depth look at one of the most convenient ways to conquer a planet, the C-9979 landing craft. We'll go over its original use by the Trade Federation, work our way through its time as the backbone of the CIS invasion fleet, and of course do a complete breakdown, seeing exactly what made it such a reliable piece in the Separatist movement. Let's take a look back before the Clone Wars to get a better idea of the C-9979 and its role in galactic history. Right before the infamous invasion of Naboo that would kickstart the Sith's grand plan, Howard Charles Engineering, a subsidiary of the Techno Union, was contacted by the Nymordians of the Trade Federation to produce a series of vehicles for their schemes. This would be one of those vehicles, and in a short time, the Zychar would see their creations spread like a virus throughout the galaxy in total war. The first time we see these craft in action was the aforementioned blockade, and later invasion of Naboo led by Newt Gunray and his Trade Federation. Painted in the unassuming dull brown of the company, his massive landing vehicles would descend on the landing zone, deploy their droid forces, unloading an army large enough to scare Queen Amidala and her people into signing the treaty. It is during this invasion that we get an interesting look at a tactic used by the Trade Federation, and which would be picked up by the CIS, using a triangular formation of 3 ships during an attack. These craft would land strategically between major cities and deploy their vast array of droids, allowing a swift cutoff of supplies and reinforcements for the defenders. The TF applied this strategy to the whole world, isolating the city of Oxen and securing it before launching a full-fledged assault on the capital of Theed. Each of these would pour out MTTs, AATs, droids, and STAPs, hoping to overwhelm in sheer numbers. At least that was the plan. As we know, through the courage of Padme, the skills of the Jedi, secret amphibious Sith, and with a little luck from Anakin, the invasion of Naboo would be a total disaster for Gunray and his associates. Following this failure to truly conquer Naboo, many of these landing craft would be captured by the Royal Naboo Security Volunteers, as well as the Gungans, and were either scrapped, turned over to the Republic, or taken as a prize, being used as civilian cargo transports. We don't see much from this craft over the next 10 years, as tensions were rising and the Trade Federation would become one of the major members of the CIS, and the only other time we see it before the outbreak of the Clone Wars was during the Battle of Nod Kartha. Legends say it was a skirmish between the Jedi who backed the local resistance against the Trade Federation. The forces of good would come out victorious in that conflict, right before the galaxy was thrown into chaos. Seceding from the Galactic Republic under the leadership of Count Dooku, the newly formed Separatist Alliance would once more call upon the C-9979 to serve as the primary transport for its armor and troops. Painted in the colors of the CIS, blue and gray, and anointed with the symbol of their cause, this vehicle would see use on countless worlds, and even the capital planet of Coruscant would see these monsters landing on its city streets, unloading hundreds of thousands of droids into combat for the capture of Chancellor Sidious. Darth Palpatine. The Senate. A very noteworthy use of this landing craft was actually not the battle between clone and droid, but a scornful encounter between the CIS and the Night Sisters of Dathomir. Here we see these landing craft deliver the Bane of Talzin, as her clan's doom is delivered via the 9979. We see its wreckage across many worlds as well. When the Clone Wars came to a sudden end following the execution of the Separatist Council, the use of the C-9979 appears to have come to an end. The Empire certainly had no use for them, and being as big and laborious as they weren't a good fit for the growing alliance. And so it fell into scrap piles and into galactic history. With the history of this beast in the books, let's take a closer look at the specifications that made this vehicle so useful. As we've previously mentioned, this landing craft was one of the many vehicles produced by the soon-to-be Confederacy by Howchar Engineering Corporation. The Zychar that made up this company are a fanatical insectoid-like species whose religion centers around the construction of high-precision machinery. To get a brand new landing craft, you'd have to shell out 12 million credits. That's enough coin to buy you 100 MTTs or 300 Vulture droids. But what did all those credits get you? Well, it's quite a lot in fact. Measuring at a length of 210 meters or 688 feet, it would stretch over 2 football fields, or over 4 A6 juggernauts placed end to end. With a towering height of 24.6 meters or 80 feet, this thing would be over 2 MTTs tall, about the height of 2 Brachiosaurus, or 98 buzz droids in their ball form. Powered by ion engines, this ship would reach a max speed of 587 km per hour or 364 miles per hour, and while certainly not slow, landing craft isn't going to win many races, and it would get lapped by other transport ships out there. The Imperial Sentinel shuttle clocks in with a top speed of 1,000 km per hour, and even the Alliance GR-75 gets up to 650. But of course, the C-9979 is the largest. It does come equipped with a Class 2 hyperdrive, the same ones found in the imposing Lucrehulk. And remember, these transports are rarely out on their own, just in case they happen to be separated from the main fleet, and even if it took damage, it did have a backup Class 15 hyperdrive. Incredibly slow, but enough so you could disappear through the blue void. Coming stocked with impressive long-range sensors and shielding, it didn't have to pray to the mechanized bug gods to survive battle, as it even had 4 dorsal-mounted twin laser cannons and 2 wing-mounted twin heavy laser cannons, in case it ever needed to dish out some damage to incoming corvettes or fighters. This armament with the sensors and shielding allowing it to hold its own until reinforcements could back it up. To crew this behemoth, it would take 231 crew, with 88 of those being automated battle droids, while the other 143 being enlisted organic officers and crew. Which is really rare for the CIS, and why so many actual life forms were needed is a mystery that only the Neimoidians or Zychar could answer. But since this is a transport first and foremost, how much cargo could it actually hold? And how many battle droids? Well, it could move 5,500 tons of cargo, depending on the configuration deployed, which is 11 million pounds, the same weight of 846 African elephants, great for toppling the Cosmic Rome, or 3,142 Rancors. It carries a massive 2,500 battle droids and droidicas. When it comes to vehicles, buckle up because it can carry 114 AATs, 1 mobile command center, 11 MTTs, 22 platoon attack craft, and an unspecified amount of NR and N99 Persuader class droid enforcers, 8 Hydroid Medusas, and 144 Vulture droid starfighters, depending on how you wanted to configure it. So as you can see, this transport certainly packs a punch, and if you have 10 or 20 of these things deployed from the control ships blockading your world, the sheer amount of arms and armor would seem uncontestable. So once this thing landed, how exactly was this army deployed? Let's break down this process from takeoff to touchdown. Usually deployed from the hangars of Lucrehulks, it would clear the atmosphere before beginning its landing cycle in the designated landing zone. In the final moments before landing on the planet's surface, massive repulsor lifts would activate to keep the ship steady, making use of super magnum anti-gravity coils, making sure the ship would stay true to course and stable when its landing gear deployed and hit the ground. All of these precautions when landing this massive craft may seem like overkill, but when this many assets are at stake, one can never be too cautious. Imagine the financial loss this would be for the Neimoidians. And it shows that the technology in the Star Wars galaxy, while certainly fantastical, is not magic and does in fact attempt to make some sense. With all these overlapping systems, it makes me wonder if repulsor lifts are subject to a real-world phenomenon called the vortex ring state, an aerodynamic condition in which a vortex ring forms around the rotor, causing a severe and often irreversible loss in lift capability. Maybe the Howard encountered similar issues in previous designs and implemented more measures to ensure a steady and safe landing. But following that landing, perimeter field sensors would scan the surrounding area for landmines or other hazards that could cause issues in the deployment process. And once in the clear, the gargantuan doors would swing open and the drop ramp would be let down. Out first would be the pre-staged combat-ready units. This would consist of either MTTs like we see on Naboo, or AATs as we often see during the Clone Wars. Repulsor tracks that lined the staging area, as they were too big and unwieldy to navigate inside of these wings without assistance. These tracks would lead the armor from the inner wings where they were stored for transport to the staging area above the main gate. The transport clamps would assist the vehicles in being lowered to the ramp for deployment onto the battlefront. This process was not quick, and depending on how many vehicles needed to be deployed, the entire process could take upwards of 45 minutes. The ship also serves as a sort of command center for the Federation or Separatist forces. When an AAT used all of its ammunition, it wasn't reloaded by B-1s like their artillery is on Ryloth, but instead these tanks would return to the C-9979 and have their entire lower frame removed within the safety of the landing craft, having this bottom shovel foot part replaced with one full of more ordnance, before being sent back off into combat. While interesting, with the speed of the AAT, I'm not sure this is the most practical tactic, but this ability is extremely useful when paired with the deployment of a mobile command center, like the one we see on Felucia during Ahsoka's kidnapping. An MCC would be set up with a landing craft at its center. Tall walls, droid sentries, and a large gate made this a quick and protected way to install a base of operations for Separatist forces. Although not seen on Felucia, if you paired this center with AAT and MTT reinforcements, it would truly be a deadly way to not only launch an invasion, but keep your landing zone safe. One issue of this mobile command center, an issue fully taken advantage of by the clones on Felucia, was the lack of shielding around that base, making it extremely vulnerable to not only bombing runs and airstrikes, but from artillery as seen with the mass driver of the ATT. Having a mobile shield generator would make it almost impenetrable, but that shield would have to be deactivated to allow the landing craft to pass, as well as any repulsor tanks used by the Seps, while Republic walkers would just be able to storm right in. When not in use, the C-9979 would be broken down, with its massive wings stored separately from the body to prevent unnecessary strain to the vehicle. When in operation, the wings were attached to this main body via specialized tensor fields to prevent them from sagging under their own weight, or even breaking off mid-flight. And this ship does have one known variant, the nicely named C-9969 landing craft, which was mentioned in the new Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels. It's essentially the same ship, but is said to be slightly larger, just allowing for even more armored vehicles to be carried into battle. So that's it for the breakdown, but check out these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. First entered the galaxy via the Phantom Menace novelization, and of course was soon seen in the film. Being the main mode of transport for the CIS, it's made its way into comics, games, books, and TV shows. Both Clone Wars and The Clone Wars feature this ship, with the version in the latter being surprisingly undersized. It's caused some confusion in legend and canon sourcebooks. Encyclopedia of Star Wars and Other Vehicles has different size measurements from the official databank. The same encyclopedia gives differing figures on the droid capacity of the ship, which conflicts with the more recent Rise of the Separatist book. And so even with the new canon trying to clear up some of the confusion and conflicting information covering all this stuff for decades, even newer canon material has different figures. Though the only variation is that one mentioned, which is just larger than what we see in Phantom Menace, not the smaller one we see in the Clone Wars show. The final design of this craft was drawn up by the famed Star Wars concept artist Doug Chiang, who based its look on a dragonfly, and what Lucas liked about it is that he said it reminded him of an old biplane. But that's it for the C-9979. If you made it this far, please hit that like button, subscribe to see more, and check out these other videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, next time you're invading a peaceful planet, please allow for 45 minutes to deplane, and the Force will be with you, always.
Tyranny is normally stationed at Kuat, the Imperial shipyards?
What's up, MetaNerdz? We'll be pulling from every canon and legend source out there to do a complete breakdown of the Tantive 3/Sundered Heart, a CR-70 corvette. The CR-70, manufactured by Corellian Engineering Corporation, is a venerable class of starship within the CR series line, renowned for its balance of speed, durability, and versatility in various galactic conflicts. Designed as a corvette, this model initially retailed for 2.9 million credits, though the price dropped to around 1 million for used models, reflecting its widespread adoption and subsequent availability in the second-hand market. Its design philosophy hinged on modularity, allowing for various configurations tailored to specific mission profiles, from diplomatic envoys to light escort duties. This flexibility made the CR-70 a popular choice amongst various factions, from private security firms to smaller planetary governments, who appreciated that balance of cost, performance, and CEC's reputation for reliability. The length of 120 meters and width of approximately 49 meters place it in a size class that strikes an optimal balance between larger capital ships and smaller transports, making it twice the length of the Gazanti and about 4 X-Wings across. This size allows the CR-70 to house adequate crew, equipment, and armaments, while remaining nimble enough for complex maneuvers in both space and atmospheric conditions. Its relatively compact frame also enables it to dock at a wider range of spaceports and facilities, which is often a crucial factor most people overlook. Its max atmospheric speed of 950 km per hour, or 590 miles per hour, is impressive for a ship of this class. Only 100 km per hour slower than an X-Wing, a bit slower than a Venator, and markedly quicker than the Arquitans. This high speed makes it particularly effective in atmospheric conditions, be it for rapid deployment of personnel, evading enemy fire, or engaging and returning fire. The ship's shielding system is of course key to its defense, where these shields not only withstood enemy fire, but also protected you from harsh space conditions, be it solar flares, asteroids, or debris fields, providing essential protection for both the crew and ship's vital systems. This is particularly important since stock it came without any weapons, but at least with the shielding it could survive in hostile environments long enough to either escape or receive support. This lack of weaponry points to that millennium of relative peace before the outbreak of the Clone Wars, where the Republic had no standing military. However, the modular design of this ship allowed for aftermarket weapons to be installed, catering to the needs of those requiring more combat-ready vessels, which we'll look at in a bit when we turn to the history. Navigation was handled by a standard navicomputer, a staple in all interstellar travel, providing the necessary calculations for precise hyperspace jumps. The inclusion of 2 high-capacity escape pods, cleverly disguised as cannon turrets, is a testament to the ship's design ingenuity. These pods provided a means of emergency evacuation for the crew, ensuring their safety in dire situations. This feature also underscores the importance placed on crew survivability in the overall design philosophy of the CR-70. And speaking of the crew, it required a minimum of 18 crew members for standard operations, but could accommodate up to 150. This flexibility in crew capacity made the ship adaptable to various roles, from a lightly manned cargo transport to a fully staffed military command vessel. And same idea with the passengers. The capacity of up to 600, again depending on the configuration, made it suitable for large-scale troop transports, evacuation missions, or as a civilian passenger liner, adaptable to the needs of any mission or operator. With a cargo capacity of 5,000 tons, the CR-70 was more than capable of handling substantial logistical tasks, be it transporting supplies, equipment, or vehicles. This capacity, combined with its speed and range, made it an excellent choice for critical supply runs, especially in blockaded or remote areas. The provision of consumables for an entire year is another feature that highlights the CR-70's capabilities for extended missions without needing to be resupplied. This autonomy was crucial for long-range recon missions, deep space exploration, or when operating in enemy territory where resupply was not feasible. And though it's unclear what those provisions were, it's unlikely that this meant 3 square meals for 600 plus people for an entire year. More likely it's a lot of shared bags of Orga root spiced Ewok jerky. The inclusion of other systems like a ventral docking ring and boarding ramp provided additional operation flexibility. The docking ramp allowed for the attachment of secondary vessels or modules, while the boarding ramp facilitated easy access for both cargo and personnel, just adding to its overall utility. And it would be via this Kenobi could stow his spoil of war and rivalry when he took Grievous's Belbullab 22. The introduction of the Vanguard C-20 retrofit suite represented a significant development in the evolution of Corellian corvettes. This suite, offered at a cost of 50,000 credits, was designed to bring the older CR-70 corvettes in line with the newer CR-90 model, both in terms of technological advancements and combat capabilities. This upgrade was a strategic move by the Corellian Engineering Corporation to maintain the relevance and effectiveness of their earlier models in the rapidly advancing technological landscape during this time of war. The use of CR-90 corvettes by the Galactic Republic, especially in the lead up to the Clone Wars, highlights their importance in galactic affairs. With the CR-70 being an older design, it was generally less equipped for combat compared to the 90. However, the Vanguard C-20 retrofit suite addressed the disparity. Essentially, this modification transformed the CR-70 into a vessel similar to the CR-90 in functionality and performance. The installation of the Vanguard C-20 retrofit suite was a complex process, requiring trained professionals and taking approximately 2 to 3 weeks. It involved significant alteration to the ship's structure and systems. For instance, it extended the ship's length to 150 meters and increased its maximum acceleration to 3,400 G, significantly enhancing its speed and maneuverability. The addition of an energy flux device for countermeasures and a secondary boarding ramp near the engine block were notable improvements. The retrofit also included the installation of 4 large covers over the engine area. These covers served a dual purpose. They likely improved the efficacy of the shield generator, being lined with a series of shield projectors, and also provided an additional layer of physical armor. In the event that the shielding was breached, these covers could absorb and dissipate incoming fire before it reached the main body of the vessel or engine array, thereby enhancing the ship's survivability in combat. In terms of armament, the upgraded CR-70 corvette now featured 2 Tamanback H9 turbolasers and 4 laser cannons, marking a significant step up in its offensive capabilities. The standard crew requirements increased to 46, reflecting the additional complexity and operational needs of these upgraded systems. As CEC shifted to producing the CR-90 corvette as its standard model, owners of the C-70 were cut a deal and given the option to get this aftermarket modification suite. This strategy helped with brand loyalty and helped to continue the use and relevance of the CR-70 in various roles, making it a practical military option. The effectiveness of these upgraded CR-70s was demonstrated in Zero ABY when several of these modified ships were used by the Alliance to restore the Republic during the Battle of Orochar. Their participation in such a crucial engagement illustrates the enhanced capabilities and reliability even deep into the Civil War era, proving to be versatile and formidable vessels for over half a century. The CR-70 corvette Sundered Heart, under the command of Senator Bail Organa, played a crucial and storied role during the turbulent times of the Clone Wars and subsequent rise of the Galactic Empire. The ship's history is intertwined with some of the most pivotal elements and figures of the era, and became to symbolize far more than just a transport vessel. During the Clone Wars, Senator Organa frequently used what was at this time still called the Tantive III to travel between Coruscant and his homeworld of Alderaan. And following the devastating attacks on the Jedi Temple by the 501st Legion, Senator Organa departed Coruscant, and he embarked on a daring and noble mission to rescue as many survivors of the Purge as possible. Utilizing a stolen Jedi homing beacon, he successfully contacted and rescued 2 of the last surviving members of the Jedi Council, Jedi Master Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi, who had narrowly escaped the Order 66 attacks on Kashyyyk and Utapau. The Tantive III, or Sundered Heart's next significant mission, involved returning to Coruscant. There, Yoda and Kenobi sought to alter a Jedi beacon at the Jedi Temple, turning off the beacon that was calling them home and preventing them from falling into the Empire's clutches. Concurrently, Senator Organa attended the Grand Convocation Chamber, where he witnessed the declaration of a new order by Emperor Palpatine. What followed was a battle unlike anything seen since the Old Republic era, with Organa rescuing Yoda following his failed duel with Darth Sidious in the Senate chamber. The ship's role in galactic history continued as it traveled to Naboo with the body of Padme Amidala, who had tragically passed away on Polis Massa after giving birth to her twins, Luke Skywalker and Leia Organa. It was aboard the Sundered Heart that the future of these twins was determined. Leia would be adopted by the House of Organa on Alderaan, and Luke by the Lars family on Tatooine. This period also marked significant developments for other key figures. Yoda, having encountered the Force ghosts of Qui-Gon Jinn, resolved to train Kenobi in the ways of communicating with Force spirits during their respective exiles. And to ensure the safety and secrecy of the twins' locations, Organa ordered that Captain Ramus Antilles wipe C-3PO's memory. All of that happened on this ship, and was followed by R2 and C-3PO being assigned to the Sundered Heart.
Okay, we have to cause as much destruction as we can, and be quick about it. 3PO? Yes, sir. Have R2 monitor Imperial comm channels and scan for any chatter about our mission.
The ship's storied history continued with significant modifications and notable missions under the command of Captain Ramus Antilles, at some point undergoing that substantial upgrade with the Vanguard C-20 retrofit, but they also installed a more powerful engine bank. Captain Antilles came to command of the Sundered Heart after remarkable circumstances. He received the ship as a gift, an acknowledgement of his bravery and resourcefulness in running aid and medical supplies past several Imperial blockades. The This act of valor underlined the increasingly perilous environment in which the Rebel Alliance operated and the critical role of skilled and daring individuals in the struggle. Under Captain Antilles, the Sundered Heart was in the Battle of Kuwait, an exceptionally daring and strategically significant operation. It helped destroy 6 Imperial shipyards orbiting Kuwait, and was instrumental in paving the way for the operation to steal the X-Wing prototypes. These prototypes would prove to be one of the most useful assets captured by the Rebel Alliance, especially at this time, providing them a much-needed edge in starfighter tech. Furthermore, the Sundered Heart relied on some of that versatility when it came to the rescue of INCOM scientists who were being transported to the spice mines of Kessel. This rescue operation not only saved valuable lives, but also protected critical technical expertise from falling into the hands of the Empire. It would be particularly useful for maintaining their new X-Wing squadrons, with these fighters being designed by INCOM. The ship's combat prowess was further displayed in the Battle of Atziri, marking another chapter in its legacy of resistance. However, during Operation Skyhook, Captain Antilles was piloting the Tantive 4, a CR-90 corvette, as he was operating from an official position within the Greater Rebel Alliance. So he didn't just use the ship that was gifted to him, but the Rebel military's newer model. The Tantive 4 would get the Death Star 1 plans away from Scarif, only to be quickly intercepted in what would be dubbed the Battle of Tatooine. Tragically, this battle resulted in the capture of the Tantive 4 and the death of Captain Ramus Antilles at the hands of Vader. So that's it for the breakdown. As for behind the scenes fact, the Tantive 3, also known as the Sundered Heart, holds a unique place in Star Wars canon, especially in its identification and representation across various media. For one, you're probably going to see people in the comments saying it's pronounced Tantive, which does seem to be technically correct, but it's just silly. Initially, it appeared in the 2005 film Revenge of the Sith, and there was a widespread assumption that this was the Tantive 4, what we see open in A New Hope. Then Leland Chi, who holds the role of Keeper of the Holocron continuity database at Lucasfilm, later clarified that the ship seen in Revenge of the Sith was not the Tantive 4, and they gave it the name the Sundered Heart. This clarification was drawn from what is now called Star Wars Legends, the original canon, and then it got the name Tantive 3 solidified in the 2016 edition of the reference book Star Wars Complete Locations, and still kept his old Sundered Heart name in the Star Wars Helmet Collection. The Sundered Heart's first appearance in Star Wars Universe was a hero unit for the Rebel Alliance in the 2006 video game Star Wars Empire at War. It was in 2010 that Leland Chi confirmed a retcon that established Senator Bail Organa's ship from Revenge of the Sith to be the Sundered Heart, and also appeared in the Star Wars Dark Times comic series. If you want to learn more, you can read Starships of the Galaxy Saga Edition, the Clone Wars Campaign Guide, or Blueprints Rebel Edition. If you made it this far, please hit that like button, it's the best way to help me out. Subscribe to see more, and check out these videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, the pirates have laser cannons, so you should too, and the Force will be with you, always. When you're looking to deploy all-terrain armored transports en masse to crush Rebel resistance, look no further than the massive Y85 Titan dropship. What's up, MetaNerdz? Today we'll be breaking down the INCOM Y85 Titan, exploring its stats, capabilities, and role in Imperial forces throughout the Galactic Civil War era and beyond. Using both canon and legend sources, we'll construct a full picture of this craft and learn about its essential role in the Imperial war machine. The Imp's deployment of massive war machines such as the all-terrain armored transport and its myriad variants required an equally massive transport dropship to shuttle these armored behemoths from orbit to planetside. The INCOM Y85 Titan filled this role, measuring an estimated 75 meters long and 35 meters wide. It was so large it could not fit aboard the hangars of Imperial-class Star Destroyers. It was rather transported in the cavernous berths of Dreadnought-class vessels, such as the Executor-class Super Star Destroyers. This chunky dropship made full use of its incredible internal space, however, able to simultaneously transport 4 AT-ATs, in addition to 4 AT-ST Scout Walkers, or sections of the prefabricated garrisons that Imperial forces favored so much as outposts or forward operating bases. The AT-ATs were stored 2 forward and 2 to the rear, above the enormous repulsor units required to keep the Titan afloat. Each of the 2 AT-AT bays were serviced by cranes and gantries, allowing personnel to board the walkers en route, and for mechanics and technicians to perform maintenance and basic repairs. A rotating rack carrying the Titan's quartets of AT-STs divided the 2 bays, allowing servicing by multiple angles. The armored, sloping frontal edge of the Titan served as an ablative shield to burn off heat when entering planetary atmospheres at high speeds, and terminated at the rooftop, double-decker command module. This cockpit space was roomy enough for dozens of personnel, with additional quarters below and behind the main command unit. The rear deck of the Titan, like the Separatist multi-troop transport, was covered with exhaust vents to redirect the enormous heat signatures generated by such large repulsor units. In battle, Titans would be escorted by TIE fighters and dropped into zones with minimal resistance in order to safeguard their valuable cargo. But as a last resort, the Titan was armed with 2 twin heavy laser cannons, which is an enormous armament, an order of magnitude larger than the AT-AT's main guns. Again, much like the MTT, these guns were semi-fixed and locked in the forward position, indicating that their use is more for destruction of buildings, fortifications, and terrain features than nimble enemy fighters or vehicles. With its all-around ablative shielding, the Titan resembled more a flying bunker than a dropship, with even the command module's screen protected by thick, armored shutters. While shooting a Titan out of the sky along with their payload would be a prime objective for Rebel commanders, this was easier said than done. That thick armor provided considerable protection, and when deployed for a combat drop, Titans would move from the hangars of their SSD parent ship through the escorting armada to a drop point above the planet, most likely shepherded by swarms of escorting TIEs. From here, their drop zone would be calculated, probe droids and orbital scanning confirming the terrain stability of the landing zone, while bombers and orbital strikes softened up defenses. When ready, the Titans would plunge into the atmosphere, their ablative armor glowing white-hot as they plummeted. Their rapid descent would minimize their time under enemy guns, the repulsors only engaging in time to slow the behemoths to a survivable speed before they made contact with the planet. A formation Titan landing, like the MTT on steroids, would kick up a massive wave of sand, snow, dirt, or other debris, the repulsor lifts roaring to keep the craft stable. From here, the AT-ATs would deploy, the first 2 from the front bay dropping, followed by the second pair in the back. It's an interesting design choice for the Imps to go with a true dropship, with only its ablative armor to shield its descent rather than a more traditional lander, operating like a standard ship. But it does fit in perfectly with the shock and awe tactics preferred by Imperial AT-AT commanders, who we all know and love. In other cases, such as the Battle of Hoth, Imperial commanders chose to deploy their barges much further from the Rebel defenses, and chose to trek their AT-ATs overland to reach their targets, limiting their risk, and if they're honest, it was out of a respectful fear for the Rebel defenses, knowing not even the Emperor's great army was invincible. Titans were also used on aquatic worlds to deploy the AT-AT's water-based variant, the AT-AT Swimmer, with Titans landing directly on the ocean surface while disgorging the swimmers directly below into the sea. The fact that Incom produced this craft, along with its smaller cousin, the Theta-class AT-AT barge, may raise a few eyebrows given that they were responsible for the creation of the X-Wing. Remember, after the X-Wing designs made it out of Incom, the Empire nationalized the company and replaced many of its staff with loyalists to the regime. Sadly, Incom products became known for their mediocrity, nothing exceptional, just enough to perform to standard, while the Y85 may be the largest product to ever come from Incom's yards. The size I gave is based on the AT-ATs. There's no official number, but like I said, it must be about 75 meters long, 35 wide, and about 40 meters tall, making its footprint not much smaller than a full American football field, or more than 3 basketball courts in size, and equal to the height of about a 13-story building. With those dimensions, it's no surprise the Titan could only fit aboard dreadnought-sized Imperial warships, being much too large for Imperial Star Destroyer hangars. Only the most serious planetary engagements during the Imperial War would call for a quads of AT-ATs, along with their Super Star Destroyer support, at which point a Rebel could only hope for a noble and quick death. An Executor-class Super Star Destroyer's complement of 30 AT-ATs could be deployed in one wave by just 8 of these barges. So that's it for the breakdown, and as for behind-the-scenes facts, the Imperial-class Star Destroyer was originally supposed to be able to carry 12 of these barges before author Curtis Saxton realized the ridiculous size implications of this, and the Theta-class was created to hold 1 to 2 AT-ATs aboard, while the Titans were relegated to use aboard Super-class ships. The method of deployment for AT-ATs on Hoth has gone back and forth between canon and legends, with the most recent canon information suggesting that Gazanti-class cruisers were used to deploy Blizzard Force, with older legends information suggesting the deployment of Titans. As cool as this actual dropship is, logistics-wise it would be simpler to just use Gazantis. But what do you guys think about this thing? Please comment down below, and if you hope to see something like this in some upcoming live action. Check out these videos, I'm sure you'll like them, but most important of all, remember, Incom was responsible for both the Rebel victory at Yavin and the Empire's strike back, that crushing defeat on Hoth, because the corporations are the only ones stronger than the Jedi and Sith, and the Force will be with you, always. What's up, MetaNerdz? This breakdown of the stunning T-51 heavy bomber created by Simon Coles. Check it out down in the link below. It seems to me to be a combo of the ARC-170 and a bit of the BSF-17 heavy bomber. I know people like to hate on that bomber. I think it's just mostly justified critique of the movie moving on to the ship, as it absolutely makes sense to have bombs dropped via space, because they are accelerated in the ship and then continue on their trajectory, even being attracted to the target when falling toward its gravity. You can still think the movie sucked, without acting like Star Wars hasn't always pushed the World War II and space theme over tech logic sometimes. As I think this large section underneath plays a similar role, being packed full of all sorts of explosives from small bombs to fat boys, everything from hundreds of anti-personnel EMP bombs for droids, to bunker busters to hit deeply buried sites, and leaflets like those dropped during World War II for propaganda or to warn civilians of upcoming attacks. As the CIS was ramping up their war crimes in those final months, and used their droid army advantage to take civilians hostage. The main body section would look just like this, with stations for engineering and comms to understand the state of the ship and get in touch with others, and gunner stations at the front and rear, operating these amazing quad laser cannon turrets. I'd imagine they'd be light laser cannons just for shooting down other starfighters, and the sheer volume of fire should be the best option against the more nimble interceptors like the Tri-Droid and later A-Wing or TIEs. Many of these options were seen in the PTB-625 planetary bomber, but the T-51 is larger and likewise has more weaponry and greater payload options, with the proton bomb bay not even sticking out of the PTB. And if you were wondering, all of the weapons on this are light laser cannons. And since its cost is 130,000 credits, and the ARC cost 180,000 credits, I think the T-51 would be much more expensive, but not twice the cost, so maybe around 230k. I would put the length closer to the MG100, so around 25 meters or 82 feet long, making it just under twice the length of the ARC-170. At about 7 meters or 23 feet tall, it was about a Jawa shorter than the AT-ST, with a whopping 37 meters or 121 feet wide, makes it nearly as wide as the Sandcrawler is long, and 5.5 TIE fighters could stretch across it. The TIE bomber is the slowest of the TIEs, so I'll cap out its atmospheric speed at 850 km per hour or 528 miles per hour, which is slower than the Y-Wing and ARC-170, though to be fair, I could see it at around the same speed. With those massive ion engine arrays, it is essentially packing in the entire thrust of the X-Wing into each cluster, with 4 of the same engines on each side, with these retro thrust nozzle caps on the ends just like the X-Wing. And then for fine maneuverability, there are these single thrusters on the end of each wing, which could be controlled independently and allow it to make sharp, near 90-degree turns in space or atmosphere. These wings would be filled with fuel and electrical lines to power everything, and the main generator and cooling systems being located in the main body, like we see with a lot of similar ships. Sometimes the S-foil is used in part to increase the area of attack, like the X-Wing. Instead of being a few inches apart, the guns are now many feet apart, but here obviously there are no guns on these wings, so it's just for their main role of heat dissipation. The underside of these wings also house 2 of the large landing gear legs, which are quite long, with its third leg dropping down from the main body, along with a ladder but seemingly no ramp, which does raise some big questions on how heavy supplies get into this thing, let alone all those bombs. But usually this is done through some sort of specialized system like many of the other missile loading tech for other starfighters and bombers, and I could see this landing on top of bay loading doors, something like we see in the Venator. You can't load it up from ground level because there isn't a lot of clearance, but by sitting over these lowered levels, these adjustable height areas, you can lift things up into the bomb section, and probably all the way up to the main tube body for other cargo. Some other details to note is that its ball turrets do not allow for any organic eyes on targets like with many other ships, which is something a lot of pilots claim to really like. And so it means that you're heavily relying on sensors and cameras, which of course opens it up to being rendered impotent from ion weaponry. Though of course they don't do that with the pilot, who would be up in this Y-Wing style cockpit up top. This is a fan ship, so there's not that much history or behind the scenes facts. I don't want to unnecessarily drag this video out, so if you could please hit the like button to offset whatever algorithm hit I take for this concise video. This is just one of those amazing creations that I've been meaning to show off for a while. I hope it gets your minds thinking of how cool it is and why we don't see more bombers like this in the Clone Wars. Really, everything else besides the TIE bomber are more like fighter jets. Even the Y-Wing bomber still fires missiles off of a structure that design-wise isn't much different from other starfighters. I think it would be cool to see more of the dedicated, actually dropping payloads on target type of craft. Dedicated bombers like this. Which again, to check out all these high quality images, check out the link down in the description or the comment. Subscribe if you want to see more, check out these other videos. But most important of all, remember, looking cool is the most important ship stat, and the Force will be with you. Always.
We're going down!
When you need secure transport without all the bells and whistles of the LAAT, look no further than the trusty New Class Shuttle. What's up, MetaNerds? Today we'll be learning all about the Grand Army of the Republic's New Class Shuttle. Everything from stats, history, role, and more, using all canon and legend sources, getting into its history post-Republic, and finish out with some cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff. The legendary Lardy, or LAATI, solo shows the Republic's trustworthy and effective gunship throughout the Clone Wars. While its firepower and maneuverability were praised, its durability left something to be desired.
Brace yourself!
The Lardies and their valuable cargoes of clone troopers took substantial losses in the early months of the war, leading to the desire for a replacement. Cygnus Spaceworks fulfilled this requirement through the development of the new class attack shuttle. The new class was designed with its role as a troop transport first and as a gunship second. It featured an effective dual-wing design and stooped cockpit module around a compact trooper bay, capable of carrying 30 fully loaded troops. While lacking the speeder bikes that the LAATI could bring along, the troops aboard enjoyed a much greater degree of safety, a paramount concern for Cygnus, which is expressed through a number of design features. Firstly, the shuttle featured a dorsal shield-generating fin, which enveloped the ship in a protective bubble like a starfighter. The LAAT had no shielding. It had these blast doors which could stop some small arms fire, and an atmospheric shielding which just made sure that the oxygen stayed in when it was traveling through space. But it was an unshielded gunship, so just adding that feature puts the new in a completely different category. The tri-wing designs of the later Cygnus craft allowed for effective shield dispersion around all parts of the ship, which lent them to greater protection, a feature possibly originating with the new with its dual wings and dorsal fin. The troop compartment itself was lined on each side with inbuilt seats, each with a crash harness that folded over the chest in the event of a hard landing. The ability for passengers to be seated and safely restrained during landings greatly improved their survivability in battlefronts all across the galaxy, in comparison with the LAAT's standing trooper bay. LAATs which took direct hits typically had all of their passengers killed when they crash landed, thrown about the compartment at lethal speeds with nothing to brace themselves with. The brutal Second Battle of Geonosis provided many bloody examples of this, with only General Kenobi and one other trooper surviving this hard crash landing, and even then they were seriously injured. Council member Coyote-Mundi was badly wounded in an LAAT crash as well, and 4 Jedi were killed aboard their gunships during the landing phase of the Battle of Murkana. In comparison, crash landings in the new were much more survivable. During a diplomatic mission to Florum, an intercepted Nu was hit and crash-landed, breaking in 2 upon impact. Despite this catastrophic damage, 5 of the 6 passengers survived and were without injury.
Pilots are dead!
A Nu transporting Cody and Crosshair took multiple hits from RPS-6 rocket launchers during their mission to Desix, and survived to crash land despite those same launchers being capable of downing HMP gunships with a single shot, powerful enough to get through the droid gunship's shielding and through the armor. When you add all these instances up, you see that the passengers in the trooper compartment enjoyed an above 50% survival rate, even when they weren't securely seated at the time of the crash. It's clear that Cygnus had delivered on their promise of making a much more survivable platform to GAR service, well suited to the assaults in heavily defended drop zones. And the cherry on top of the durability and shielding was the speed, 850 kilometers per hour, reducing the time the Nu spent under enemy guns from high atmosphere down to the ground. And it's not that far off from some fighters, and is even tied with the TIE bomber. Its final survivability feature was the escape pod, which likely consisted of the head of the transport jettisoning itself from the body, being its own self-sufficient little craft that could navigate even deep space. Again, this feature would be seen in later Cygnus shuttle products. The troops disembarked through the forward hatch mounted under the cockpit, covered by a pair of medium dual laser cannons mounted on the cheeks of the shuttle's control section in swivel turrets. 2 sets of dual light laser cannons, one on each side of the fuselage next to the wing joints, gave the shuttle a chance to drive off enemy fighters. The pilots were seated in a paired double canopy section, reminiscent of the LAATI's design, lined with controls needed to operate the craft, and which provided decent visibility. Unlike the LAAT, the Nu was well suited to operations in space as well as in atmosphere, and came equipped with an excellent Class 1 hyperdrive. That's faster than most starfighters out there in the galaxy. That hyperdrive, as well as the 2 full days of stores, gave the Nu significant range, allowing the shuttle greater use as an inspection and patrol vessel, carrying teams of specialists or officers to distant outposts. While newer stats up that range greatly, increasing it to an entire month. with a backup Class 12 hyperdrive, which is very slow but really just something you hope to never use. The Nu was designed with carrier operations in mind, its wings folding up to a vertical position to allow greater deck space in a similar fashion to the V-19s and later Cygnus shuttles. And while it was initially envisioned to entirely replace the Lardy, this never did come to pass, and instead the shuttle settled into its own specialized niche. While the Nu could ferry troops planet-side quickly, its capabilities as a gunship were limited, without the hard points or heavy missile launchers of its competitor. The inclusion of that hyperdrive made the Nu expensive in comparison to the relatively cheap LA-AT, which the Republic was able to pack into the hangar decks of acclimators and venators by the thousands. Such a widespread replacement would not be economical, and instead the Nus found roles as interfleet transports, ferrying personnel, messages, and valuable cargo, and were particularly popular among officers, who benefited from the secure transport for them and their staff. The Nu also spawned a sub-variant, the Rho-class transport shuttle, which we might cover at a later time. The Nu is said to cost 85,000 credits brand new, supposedly the same as the LA-AT, but that doesn't really match up with the lore on all these improvements on shielding and that ridiculous Class 1 hyperdrive, with both of those features being the most expensive things to add to a ship. But since that also meant the maintenance cost would be high, perhaps that's why you can find them used for so cheap, because when the Republic became the Empire, you could pick up a used Nu for 50,000 credits. That's less than the cost of a new TIE fighter. Nus were inherited into the Galactic Empire's military along with the rest of the Republic war materiel, and are rare in that they served for a considerable time before being phased out. The Empire got rid of the Lardies first, but retained the more modern and survivable Nus as it spread its reach across the galaxy, finally replacing the LA-ATs in a way the Republic never did. Under the Empire, they weren't doing planetary assaults as in the Clone Wars, and the Nu became more of a protective shuttle, not really in an attack shuttle role, seen used by enlisted personnel and officers alike, with even notables such as Grand Moff Tarkin and Admiral Rampart favoring the dependable Nu for its speed and protection. And these would be eventually phased out by the new Lambda shuttles rolling off Cygnus production lines, which specialized in the transport and VIP role, dropping the attack transport capability of its predecessor. If it landed here on Earth, it would be about as long as 3.5 giraffes laid end to end, or about 1.5 school buses long. In flight mode with its wings extended, the Nu would be about as tall as an Olympic swimming pool is wide, or 6 SUVs laid end to end. Sadly, we have no stat on how heavy it is, although with a cargo capacity of 2 tons, you can get more than 2 full dewbacks in there, and with the volume, you're looking at about 140 Yoda species, if you ever caught them all. And as for cool facts and behind the scenes stuff, you can get your hand on the Nu class and use it to drop off troops yourself via mods for Empire at War such as Fall of the Republic and Republic at War. While a lot of this info comes from the Clone Wars visual guide, the campaign guide, Encyclopedia of Starfighters and Other Vehicles, and Rise of the Separatist guidebook. If you made it this far, please hit that like button, share the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to see more. That's all the best ways to help me out. But most important of all, remember, it doesn't matter how great your ground troops are if they get blown up in the sky. And the Force will be with you, always. What's up, MetaNerdz? In this video, we'll be breaking down the Bulwark trio of ships, and you'll see why I think they're one of the most unique, forgotten, useful, and ugly capital ships ever produced in the galaxy far, far away. They were all produced by the Techno-Union Engineers, which is a broad term for the companies under the Union umbrella, with the most direct producers being Transgal Meg Industries Incorporated. The Bulwark would be their most notable creation, but also the sleek and unique Kirax assault fighter, though their biggest impact would be in the creation of the hyperspace transport rings for the Delta 7 and Eta 2s, which is a nice peek behind the propaganda curtain as this corporation was within the Techno-Union but was able to sell crucial parts to Kuat, which fulfilled orders by the Republic. Most bulwarks were pumped out at the Foros shipyards located in high orbit over the uninhabited, mineral-rich world of Forost. To prove just how efficient of a business model it is to strip mine a whole planet, this shipyard is one of the oldest in the galaxy, rivaling the ring over Kuat, and has been converting rocks into ships for nearly 30,000 years. Located at L10 on the galactic map, it even served as the HQ for the Republic Navy during the Tianese War, around 24,000 BBY. And as you would expect, it was the target of countless Sith attacks, and would still be operating into the most recent Sith Empire of Darth Sidious. The Mark I would be 1,000 meters or 0.62 miles long, making it 62% in the ISD. We don't get a price, and there are no numbers given for the amount of turbolasers and ion cannons, though we get the very specific detail that its armored hull was so strong that captains had no fear in ramming through smaller ships. I would think that this means it's using uniquely strong alloys, as even the Venator is shown to take damage from the very light Vulture droids. Or as the Rebel and New Republic historian Vorin Naal put it, the engineers called the design the Bulwark Mark I, a kilometer-long behemoth with turbolasers, ion cannons, and enough armor to ram small ships with impunity. When the Clone Wars broke out in 22 BBY, the Republic quickly moved to put a blockade over Forost. Now this is even worse than a SWAT team surrounding an armory, because Forost actually made the weapons in this analogy, they made the starships, and it mostly pulls the raw materials to do so from its own planet. But like all highly complex creations, over time they did rely on specialized parts from all over the galaxy, so the hope was that the Republic blockade could prevent crucial supplies from coming in. Like if it was a weapons manufacturer, they couldn't get primers for the bullets. If just that one part is missing from these complex machines, it doesn't matter if you can make 99% of it in-house. And so this strategy worked for about 2 years. The Republic did not invade but kept them locked down, all while the engineers grew more bitter and ingenious. And you really don't want to make military engineers more bitter and ingenious. Eventually, they found workarounds and ways to reverse engineer the crucial missing parts, and the Bulwark fleet was born. Celestin Commander Duoningo would head this planetary jailbreak. In his perfectly named ship, the Unrepentant, these engineers who had been imprisoned by the Great Republic out of a fear that they might aid those planets that wished to secede, this historically allied world would see a flash of violence as this fleet broke the blockade. Again from our historian, quote, "With the old Celestin Duoningo in charge of the Armada, the Bulwark fleet broke through the Republic's blockade and proceeded to smash military outposts throughout Coruscant's Sector 0. This Sector 0 is also called Sector 1, because why not, and was the site of the Republic's first sector army, with the most important military location outside of Coruscant and Kuat being the Anaxis War College and the surrounding shipyards. The Bulwark fleet was able to get on a string of victories through the Anaxis sector, but they were stopped by an unexpected foe. The engineers had been studying the tactics and capabilities of the Arquidens, Acclamators, and Venators, but launched in the first month of 20 BBY was the Great Victory 1 class Star Destroyer. This Victory fleet was used to protect Anaxis, and when the commanders came in high on their string of shocking wins, they got too big for their britches, or bulwarks, and they were finally stopped by the awesome and strange power of the Victory fleet. What makes the Victory so unique is that it's packed with 80 concussion missile tubes, 20 on each side, compared to only 4 torpedo tubes on the Venator. Those 4 were heavy torpedoes, but still you can see that this is an unprecedented attack option by the Republic fleet, which could have been delivering hundreds of missiles onto the Bulwark fleet at once. And suffice it to say, the brave and bold Duoningo went down with his ship. Or as it was recorded in the history books, quote, "Over the skies above the core world Anaxis, the Admiral was killed when his flagship disintegrated." Later documents would reveal that the Victory class was pushed into combat because of the threat Ningo posed, fielding it 6 months ahead of schedule in this last-ditch effort to save Anaxis. And the future rebel leader Jan Dodonna was one of the Victory class task force commanders. So the Bulwark was so effective it forced the Victory into battle. It would live on in the form of the Mark II and III. Well, even many of the ones would live on, being heavily modified over the years, with one serving in the New Republic's Rapid Response Task Force and seeing combat as late as 5 ABY, while another one got upgraded with a Class 0.6 hyperdrive, which puts it in Slave 1 territory, making it among the fastest ships in the history of the galaxy, which is kind of insane for this size. And it also got additional shielding and space for 3 starfighter squadrons, so something like 10 to 15 fighters, with several Jadithu-class landing ships secured to the outside of its hull, which is one of my favorite things some forces do. We really only see this done regularly with the CIS capital ships and the droid fighters that all attach outside, a simple and easy way to transport units far beyond the internal capacity of the hangar bay. The Mark II design was rushed to production immediately, with the whole Ningo campaign being one of the best proofs of concept that you could ask for. Though sadly, there are literally no details on the Mark II. Luckily, with the Mark III, we get the most details of all. And it is the most impressive. But I do want to start with understanding the leadership at its creator company, Transgal Meg. By the time this was produced, the Republic was now the Empire, and Chief Administrator Braig Forul was at least outwardly a fervent supporter of his new lord. He was such a trusted ally that the company was given a planet. When Narg was discovered in 3 BBY, they let Forul act as its mini-emperor, in part because this world was home to a long-lost human colony. A colony that likely made itself lost on purpose, maybe actively killing scouts or creating rumors Scooby-Doo style in order to make sure there weren't any visitors, because the planet was full of extremely xenophobic humans. So xenophobic that even Palpatine's leadership weren't sure what to do with them. It's hard to imagine, but even lording over alien races was disgusting to them. They thought humans shouldn't be interacting with aliens at all. And of course this made it difficult to integrate them even into the military. So they figured they would reward the loyal CA Ferrule, or dump this problem on him and let him figure out a way to put them to work making ships. Like our World Wars history shows, the xenophobes do have a knack for creating great machines, and they made the sleek Zytar and the glorious Bulwark Mark III. And here's where 3 different theories start. The simplest is Ferrule just didn't have any ideological support for the Empire. It was just a pure opportunist, as he sold products to both Black Sun and the Rebel Alliance. The second is the funniest, that perhaps the xenophobes hated that the Empire was even working with aliens so much that they would prop up the crime and rebel elements and perhaps harbor dreams that they could rise up in the chaos to replace it. I think that's the least likely, but the most crazy, so I wanted to mention it. I actually think he was a secret rebel supporter, because he knew it would be a long, tortured death sentence if he was caught selling the Bulwark Mark III to rebels. This was so brazen and insane of a decision that to me it only makes sense if it was driven by moral or political convictions. Even the Incom X-Wings had to go through a lot of rigmarole to fall into the hands of rebels, but it is stated that this behemoth was eventually openly known to be sold to rebels, and that in of itself would be a declaration of war on the Empire. And the fact that the rebels accepted them is a great example of not judging your allies too harshly during a time of war. Because imagine what the fish folk, Mon Mothma and Leia, would have thought if they actually met the people welding and wiring this thing together. The most notable feature is its length. At 2,500 meters, or 1.6 miles, it was more than 1.5 times the size of the Imperial class. But like I'm always trying to stress, it's the volume that you should be measuring, which was the total length of the Mark I, twice the ISD, and it was around 1,500 meters wide, which was nearly the length of the ISD. I'm no math wizard, so let's just do it straight as if they were rectangular prisms. We get 717 million cubic meters for the ISD, and 3.75 billion cubic meters for the BM3. I'd imagine it's a Class 2 hyperdrive. It specifically has what's called extensive shielding. We don't get exact numbers on the turbo lasers, ion cannons, or tractor beams, but likely to streamline everything and have this behemoth have all of its systems just run off of Tabana gas. They do not try and match the Victory class and pack in a ton of missile systems. It does act like a carrier in that it has 120 starfighters split into 10 squadrons. It could transport 4 regiments planetside to capture or secure objectives. The Republic had regiments of 2,648 clones, but other times it could just be 1,000 troops, while the CIS droid regiments are around 3,500, especially since this was used by the rebels, so around 4,000 troops with accompanying transports. This is still only 1/4 the troop capacity of the Acclimator and less than the ISD. I'd imagine you could cram more people into it, but that's true for every ship, so I'm leaving it at 4K. Still, this is an amount of rebel forces far greater than we ever see deployed, and shows that some of the most dramatic battles sadly happen off-screen. And so if you wonder what the rest of all this space is filled with, I'd imagine it's a ton of redundant generators to power everything, including that extensive shielding, with hull armor that is far thicker than most ships, allowing it to absorb fire head-on, not just dissolving across a shield, but like a bulletproof plate of thick steel. And so again, that needs more power, and just look at how much of the ISD is dedicated to power generation. So that'd be even more true for this larger and even more power-hungry behemoth. With everything from the brute smashing through objects option, the firepower and shielding, and then the fighters and landing craft for its small army, you can see why this thing took on a mythical existence in the Rebellion, with rumors of the mobile fortress circling. The only obvious problem is that, of course, a full fleet of ISDs and support craft could take out this single target with concentrated fire, no matter how good your shields and how thick your armor were, and the rebels couldn't exactly overtly go on the warpath conquering territory. Kinda goes against the whole hit-and-run strategy. Where it could excel is in areas later in the war when the Empire was being spread too thin, and where even if they concentrated their might, they might eventually fall into a trap. At best, a Pyrrhic victory, losing many of their forces, guaranteeing a PR victory for the rebels with tons of losses, as well as the potential of having captured ships that snowballed into growing the rebel fleets. Locations that were that protected were few, but include the Mon Calamari shipyards, not the ones on Mon Cala, but the ones hidden out in space, and the Celestin Home Guard. Because they were so powerful, they were able to remain somewhat independent. They couldn't openly support the rebellion, but they had far more autonomy than most. And they would license the Mark IIIs, so we get Celestin-made versions that would have to be set up for hijacking by rebel forces. The Arrow of Celest was famous for its brazen breakthrough that was reminiscent of the very first blockade buster over Forost. Since Imperial ships were there trying to stop this problem of rebel hijackers, they likely suspected the Celestins were in on it. and calling their bluff that they were helpless victims and would appreciate help, this hijacking plan was perfect, because it made it so the imps couldn't just claim that the Solastans were giving up the ships to rebels, because those rebel thieves even bested the imps. With just a skeleton crew, they were able to push through the Imperial blockade and make the jump to hyperspace, where it would then act like a defense fleet and secure rebel space. So ironically, it would end up fulfilling the role of the victory fleet over an Axis that sparked this very line of ships.
It's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
My favorite feature is the command deck, this little semicircle right here, as if to stress the scale of this thing. Still sticking out a bit, but not like the Star Destroyers, and can only be hit from the front, while being easier to protect with the ship's shielding. There are 3 massive ion engines at the rear with 5 auxiliary, while these pair of hangars on each side are perfect for not sending ships straight out into fire, while also being heavily protected by these guns scattered all over, but more concentrated toward this first third. Though they did not play a role in the major battles of the Civil War, they bet on the right team, and old Chief Administrator Bragg Ferrule by all accounts kept his planet and kept pumping these out for the New Republic, though I doubt any of the workers were invited to the New Republic victory parades. They would play their largest role in 25 ABY during the Yuzon Vong War, where at least 4 of them used their bulk to evacuate the planet Raichel. Though even if they carried off tens of thousands, most of the civilians were left to the horrific deaths inflicted by the life-altering arts of the Vong. The ships would go on to pull off one of the greatest reversals of this war. The Vong had hopes of turning the planet Shraymar into one big harvest, so joint forces with the Imperial Remnant and New Republic worked together to keep up a blockade. They feigned a retreat and then returned to pin the Vong ships near the surface, and the Bulwarks played a major part in raining down death via orbital bombardments, disintegrating much of the ships and destroying their supply fields, before safely escaping through hyperspace. That's it for its breakdown, and as for behind-the-scenes facts, the Bulwark Mark I was technically first introduced in 2005 in the New Essential Chronology, but was a nod to the Bulwark-class battlecruiser from the 1998 video game Star Wars Rebellion. We barely get a mention of the Mark II in the Essential Guide to Warfare, and all of them have been brought into canon via the Rise of Separatists, the RPG guidebook. So that's it for the breakdown. Please hit that like button, it really is the best way to help me out. Subscribe to see more and check out these other videos, but most important of all, remember, if you ever find yourself running against Mon Mothma for office, just keep bringing up the Bulwark shipwrights, and the Force will be with you, always.
Are you confident your ship can get in and out undetected?
We don't call it the Ghost for nothing.
What's up, MetaNerdz? In this complete breakdown, we'll pull from every source of information out there to fully understand the Ghost, Phantom 1, and Phantom 2, one of the most unique and practical combinations of ships in history. This is a modified VCX-100 light freighter produced by Corellian Engineering Corporation, the same company that produced the famed YT series and YV series freighters, as well as the Gazanti, Baleen, and a whole lot more. Being one of the largest shipwrights in the galaxy, with countless freighters of the same model being seen over thousands of worlds, was one of the first aspects of this craft that made it perfect for a rebel group. Like Han Solo and his YT-1300, everyone from self-serving criminals to freedom fighters would pick ubiquitous craft that could easily blend in. And with CEC designs, they were known for their modularity, selling all sorts of products that could be attached in myriad ways, so even a modified version of these craft wasn't really out of the ordinary. It would cost 155,000 credits fresh off the lot, which is about 1.5 times the cost of the YT-1300, and only 5k more than an X-Wing. At a length of 43.9 meters or 144 feet, it was about an A-Wing plus Jawa triplets longer than the Millennium Falcon. Being 14.5 meters or 48 feet tall made it taller than a 4-story building, or a bit shorter than a pair of ties. While at a width of 34.2 meters or 112 feet, it was about 3 X-Wings across, or about 2 semi-trucks long, 3 tall, and 14 across. With a top atmospheric speed of 1,025 kilometers per hour or 637 miles per hour, it's right around the X-Wing and notably faster than the YT-1300. To put this in context, that 200 km per hour difference between these two freighters is the same gap between the X-Wing and TIE Fighter, and the TIE is considered to be remarkably quick, so compared to its freighter friends, it would have been shockingly fast. This power was generated by a pair of main engines and 2 secondary engines, while the hyperdrive rating was a standard Class 2 with a backup Class 14. It was allowed to be sold with weaponry, but stock it was just a pair of CEC dual laser turrets, which would have likely been low power. Enough to make the Citizen feel like they could fight off some simple pirates, but nothing the Emperor had to worry about being used against his imps. But the Ghost would come to have a dorsal laser cannon turret, a nose-mounted laser cannon turret, 1 Taemin-Bak MS-2B twin laser cannon, and 1 Taemin-Bak KX-4 dorsal laser turret. as well as 2 proton torpedo launchers. The laser cannon turrets would have been modified to fire military-grade bolts. Obviously, the proton torpedo launchers were highly illegal and difficult to acquire, while Tame & Back was a military defense contractor, making everything from the laser cannons on the X-Wings to the turbo lasers on Star Destroyers. And those weapons are a part of the VCX auxiliary starfighter attached to the back. This attaching feature being one of the greatest examples of Corellian Engineering Corporation's modular designs, as it can seamlessly dock with the Ghost, making it act like a mothership, something usually only seen in much larger craft. And it's the only one I can think of where the connection is so seamless, while allowing all the guns to still be used while docked, providing excellent cover during space battles where every ship is trying to maneuver to get behind you. The auxiliary fighter is only about an Ewok shorter than the X-Wing, and only costs 22,000 credits. Though I'd guess that's some sort of marketing, it's way too cheap for it to be sold like that by itself. It must be some way that they upsell you on the VCX 100. For just 20 grand more, you get a whole starfighter/shuttle. It required only a single pilot to operate and could accommodate 4 passengers. It would not come with a hyperdrive or shielding, though a hyperdrive and astromech socket would be installed by Quarry, the mad Mon Calamari engineer that created the B-Wing prototype. And then the Phantom would go from being carried on the back of the Ghost to being the bearer of this prototype, acting like the hyperdrive rings used by the Delta 7, overcoming the issue of the Blade Wing losing its power when it fired that prototype beam weapon and then was too drained to activate its own hyperdrive. This mission also showed us that they often carry spare parts, but the damage suffered when they tried to land on Quarry's world was too great. The Phantom had magnetic clamps used to attach to other ships, and different surfaces and structures like the spire on Stygian Prime. We know what some of the buttons in the cockpit do, at least this blue and white one is the comms and acts like a jamming signal display. And both the Phantom and the Ghost have helpful ship visualizer data screens on the right side of the cockpit. You can still work on repairs for the Phantom while it's docked with the Ghost. And there is a diagnostic panel located on the Ghost side of the bulkhead, that way someone can coordinate with the person doing the repairs. And a record of this is kept in the computer to access the history, which is how Zeb realized that they missed the fuel tank damage alert. And when there was a fuel leak, it didn't take long for it to run completely empty, and obviously it wasn't as heavily armored as the mothership, so both scrapes and bumps from the terrain or incoming fire would damage the Phantom pretty quickly. The Phantom can dock forward or reverse, allowing it to be even more concealed if need be, but mostly used to make it easier to attach. In the middle of combat, you could just fly straight in as fast as you could, but when you had some downtime, you could back it in. Hera was able to outrun TIE fighters in the Phantom with her excellent piloting skills, being able to use terrain to her advantage and using the dorsal turret to deliver precision shots into pursuing TIEs. And she was able to pick up on the most minor of damage to the ship, being more sensitive than the actual sensor arrays.
Oh, there's damage? Steering's off.
Not what this says.
It's what I say, and I know my ship.
While its holo projector would display right over the controls. Looking back at the Ghost, we can use this fan-made schematic to get a grasp on the interior space, with the 4 smaller cargo holds right behind the cockpit being turned into rooms for the crew, and the airlocks on each side leading to the 4 cargo holds that line this area, leading to the lounge with simple seating and standard Dejaric table. Which also works as their holoprojector for mission briefings and transmissions, though Chopper could serve that purpose as well. Then we get to the galley or kitchen in the rear. Going down the ladders into the lowest level, you would have the staging area, while up in the nose you have this rectangular part under the cockpit which contained the gun turret, and another opening to take in cargo here, where you can move it straight to the back to the large cargo bay area here, while the ladder takes you up to the gun turret itself, which had a ton of ship and environmental data panels like a proper cockpit. The crew rooms themselves had bunk beds, small storage areas on the side and under the bed, and have locks on them, but these can be easily picked by a skilled Lothrat. The galley is spacious with tons of storage cabinets and devices to prepare food, and a simple table perfect for practicing your Jedi mind powers. All of the cannons can be fired from the cockpit or by the astromech when plugged into the numerous droid sockets. This is something Chopper would do often, showing us that he had become quite a good shot. He would also be responsible for jamming, sending out transmissions, putting out fires, and of course keeping the crew on their toes. And his bravery was recognized by all, as he could take damage simply by being connected via the droid socket. The Inquisitor TIE, a TIE Advanced V1 prototype, is far more powerful than the standard one, and we see these bolts rocking the ship, and though the whole armor absorbs and diffuses the surge from these plasma bolts, some of it is transferred into Chopper, and it even caused a small fire in the main controls, though the guns were still operational. The Ghost can handle a ton of direct hits from TIE fighters even at close range, while having the damage output to take out Gazantes and Arquidens on its own. Through a combo of sheer firepower and Hera's understanding of her ship and her enemy, targeting weak junctions in the armor, Placing shots on power and weapon systems or fuel tanks often resulted in catastrophic failures that even threatened the Imp allies nearby. Now this was designed as a cargo hauler, and besides all that internal storage, it can pick up at least 5 of the large shipping containers made standard throughout the galaxy. And this same mechanism can be used to pick up ships including the Phantom, which was useful when it ran out of fuel. Overall, the Ghost had over 87 illegal upgrades to the stealth systems, on top of the standard engine baffling, which was in place to cover up the heat signature created by the engine array, as well as on top of the energy dampeners and static jammers that came stock. The reason why some of this signature suppressing technology was legal was in order to cut down on the chaotic electromagnetic overlaps at major ports. But what Hera was able to achieve with all these illegal upgrades allowed the Ghost to appear like nothing more than a common solar fluctuation or background radiation on the scanner of most ships in the galaxy, likely using tech usually implemented in larger craft, what most would consider overkill, but which Phoenix Squad would use to slip in and out of Imperial-controlled areas at ease. Combine all that with the firepower mentioned, and you can see why anybody who knew covert craft, like Han and Lando, had an instant appreciation of what the Ghost was pulling off. Though something even they would have thought was insane is that there were countless times that Hera would jump to hyperspace without having a route plotted. As Han once put it,
"Traveling through hyperspace ain't like dusting crops, boy. Without precise calculations, we'd fly right through a star or bounce too close to a supernova and that'd end your trip real quick, wouldn't it?"
But to be fair, when Hera was certain that if she waited another second she'd be turned into stardust, she would just press that lever and hope for the best, even if quantum spaghettification through a black hole was a much longer and painful death. But it is something others like Grease and Cal Kestis were seen doing in this era as well. And Chopper swore that the Navicomputer in the Ghost was rude and pushy, to the point that they would often get into fights. Keep in mind this is coming from Chop, so either the Navicomputer was even more rude than he was, or he was the problem. Perhaps they were about the same level of trickster. As for its history, Hera would acquire the Ghost about 8 years after the Empire was announced, so 11 BPY, 6 years before the Spectres met Ezra. And ever since she was a young girl, she had dreamed of flying the stars.
You get to live on a starship? That's my dream.
And through her father Cham Syndulla's efforts to free Ryloth, she met many Clone Wars heroes and then the earliest of the rebel leaders. While the astromech C-110P was brought into the family after a Y-wing crash-landed on the Syndulla compound during the Ryloth campaign. The droid's beloved pilot was dead, and his memory and logic circuits were damaged, leading to a form of AI PTSD, and some believe it led to his disregard for life. And when Hera's mom was killed, Cham became even more involved in the fight against tyranny, leaving Hera to feel abandoned, and she would grow closer to the droid. In 11 BBY, she would also run into Kanan Jarrus during the Gorse conflict, and they came to realize that they were both quite capable at foiling the Empire's plans, saving Gorse and its moon from Imperial destruction. Shortly after this, they would pick up Sabine Wren and Garazeb Borrelios, and they worked harmoniously as the Spectres, slipping into Imperial targets via Phantom and Ghost, fitting names for the powerful stealth ship that could both take life and slip away unnoticed. Like the most frightening of legends, they quickly became the stuff of Imperial nightmares. During a routine mission, they would run into a Lothrat named Ezra Bridger, who would eventually be shown to be Force-sensitive and brought onto the crew. But not before showing his resourcefulness as a thief, breaking free by using their air vents to climb throughout the ship. He was now raiding with a rebel cell and training as a Jedi. The Ghost would act as mobile home and Jedi temple for one of the few new Padawans in the entire galaxy, while two of the codenames they would use include Starbird and Tontine, as there were numerous times they had to work with more shady underworld characters, or times when they pretended to be bounty hunters serving the Empire. And these missions show how Hera's understanding of the ship allowed her to use systems in ways that weren't intended.
Rerouting auxiliary power to the hull.
And I do wonder if this could have been used to destroy the tracker fired by the Grand Inquisitor. It may have been too chaotic and risky to pull off in this fight, but you could see how this shocking of the hull could be a part of a good escape hygiene. It could just be something you wanted to do before you jumped to hyperspace, making sure you shorted out any trackers on the surface. And as the Spectres became more trusted within the not yet formally organized Rebel Alliance, they would also work with Saw Gerrera's partisans, joining efforts after the Ghost confirmed reports that the Empire was involved in grand building projects, something that was requiring enormous amounts of Kyber crystals. Though with the larger vision and structure, it threatened to sacrifice their members to the greater mission. When Kanan was captured, Fulcrum gave orders not to risk their entire cell by trying to rescue a single member, with him being taken to Mustafar. But Hera's own droid would distract her, letting the rest of the Spectres sneak off with the Phantom. Eventually they were able to rescue Kanan, and Fulcrum knew that now that the entire crew was involved, They were too valuable to lose, giving the order to send Phoenix Squadron CR-90 blockade runners and the Ghost to assist. This did ensure the survival of one of the most valuable units in the rebel movement, resulting in the death of the Grand Inquisitor and destruction of Grand Moff Tarkin's Star Destroyer, Sovereign. To hunt this Ghost down, imps like Agent Callus had to get creative, and monitor his own for any that might defect to the rebellion. His bait came in the form of Imperial Minister Maketh Tua, which nearly led to Darth Vader capturing the Spectres. This led to the Ghost playing a crucial role in the defense of the Phoenix fleet, with Vader's TIE Advance destroying their flagship Phoenix 1, along with squadrons of A-Wings. It was only through her expert piloting skills that she was able to slip between the Star Destroyers and time the tractor beam activation to trap Vader and escape through hyperspace. It was through her use of the B-Wing that got Hera promoted to Phoenix Leader, and shortly after, the Ghost was able to free Jun Sato's corvette, Liberator, from the tractor beam of an Imperial Star Destroyer. By using Sabine's expert knowledge of the Imperial weapon systems, she knew the exact device to hit, and when the Ghost's forward cannons were destroyed, Hera simply rammed the projector, breaking it off and allowing the rebels to escape. Then they would make it seem like the rebellion stole Sphyrna-class Hammerhead corvettes being delivered by Princess Leia Organa. This is just one of the many times that Alderaan would be a convenient victim of rebel attacks, leading all in the ISB to know, but not be able to prove, that the royal family was helping build a rebel movement. From here, the Ghost would become the first ship in millennia to navigate through the star cluster that hid the Lasat homeworld of Lyrasan. The Ghost's controls would be manipulated by the mystical bow rifle, which was a force-connected weapon not too dissimilar from a lightsaber. With the old priestess, they were able to survive the nebula that shredded all form of ship that tried to pierce this veil. And they would either have the coordinates mapped in the navicomputer, or more mystically, it may have been some aspect of the force itself that was welcoming to the Ghost and its pilot. When they ran into Purrgil, Hera wanted to open fire on the hyperspace swimming space whales.
They'll rip the hull apart! Prepare to fire! We gotta drive them back!
Don't shoot!
Ezra was surprised by her violent reaction, but later when they survived this stream, she would explain the destruction she had seen.
Purrgil are dangerous. They wander into hyperspace lanes, crash into ships. I've lost more than one friend that way.
The Purrgil would lead them to a gas refinery that would provide valuable fuel for the Ghost and the entire Phoenix Squadron. The Ghost would be home to a reunion for the Syndulas, but her father was still upset that she chose to save the galaxy before she could even liberate her home.
If you gave me half the attention you gave this second-rate junk pile, we'd have liberated Ryloth by now.
But when their mission proved successful and the Imperial transport was destroyed, with reports of their people rising up all over Ryloth, he could see how the Phoenix's method of spreading sparks throughout the stars would eventually burn down the Empire. Ghost would continue to act as a mobile Jedi temple, hosting Ahsoka Tano at times, and continuing Ezra's training in everything from meditation, holocron studies, and lightsaber combat. They would find and establish Chopper Base, one of, if not the lead rebel base before Yavin. The local spiders would have to be fought back in order to establish a perimeter, and Hera was horrified to see that their webs were able to keep the Ghost pinned even with thrust at full power. The old hull shock trick stunned them for a second, but it wasn't strong enough, and she says that they can't just keep zapping their power away.
No! If we drain too much power, we won't be able to lift off!
The bugs were able to open the airlock, and once they realized that the beacons could be used to repel them, Chopper Base would be relatively calm. The Phantom would then be used to travel to Malachor in one of the most important missions for the Jedi survival since Order 66, with Tano, Jarrus, and Bridger discovering that Darth Maul was still alive while fighting off Inquisitors and finally Darth Vader among the ruins of an ancient Sith temple, and setting it all to self-destruct in a blast that consumed Tano. A blow to Kanan's faith in the future of the Jedi Order, and the loss of one of the highest-ranking members of the rebellion. And after this touch with darkness, the Phantom would be destroyed over Requiem Station. After being cut into by the automated defenses, these descendants of the Buzz Droid, it would later fall to its doom as debris crashed into it, knocking it off its magnetic hold, as the entire station was going up in flames. While Kanan and Ezra were responding to what appeared to be an attack on a Sphyrna-class corvette by an Inquisitor, Hera made a call to them, revealing that Maul had captured the Ghost and its crew. As he studied the interior, he realized how much it meant to him.
I assumed that this ship was merely a transport, but I realize it is much more than that. This is your home.
In their attempted escape, they would use the magnetic clamps of the main cargo hold to pin Maul's mechanical legs, though he was too powerful, and they would only be free of the old Sith once he got the intel he wanted. Sabine would realize just how much the Empire was haunted by the Ghost when she went undercover at an Imperial Academy. One of the TIE pilot simulations focused on the Ghost swooping in to protect a rebel ally, showing Sabine just how well they understood the ship and its capabilities after all these years. having it pop out of nowhere and quickly eliminate everything in its path.
Ah, but you are wrong, Cadet. It was a transport called the Ghost, which has been modified for combat. The rebels are a desperate group of extremists. They'll fight with any ship using any means necessary to undermine our authority.
From here would be a homecoming that would further prove that Cham Syndulla and the Free Ryloth movement would benefit from being involved in a larger alliance. With the Ghost soaring in overhead to make quick work of an ITT, and though this scout trooper showed why they were elite, his fancy speeder bike work only helped to add his helmet to Ezra's collection. Hera would learn that the Imp had set up a base in their old family home, and though she failed her personal mission to save a precious family heirloom, they do eliminate the Empire's forward base on Ryloth. In their next heist to scoop up proton bombs from an old CIS wreck, they make an unlikely ally in the form of a T-Series droid that was convinced to see the Empire was the true enemy of the Separatist holdouts. And in their escape from an Imperial strike team, the Spectres managed to secure a replacement, the Phantom II, which was a Sheathipede-class transport shuttle. This was slightly faster at 1,250 km per hour, now past the TIE Fighter. It was roughly the same size, with the exact same passenger capacity. And similar damage output, just not with the versatility of a top-mounted turret. There were just the 2 forward-facing cannons and 2 rear-facing. On one mission to help rebel sympathizers, they run into another Corellian creation, a YT-2400 light freighter that was the home ship of Iron Squadron. In the battle that ensued, eventually the 2400 would need to be rescued, and the magnetic clamp saved the day again, grabbing hold of the ship when its engines and hyperdrive failed. When they go to investigate the reports of the disappearance of the Geonosian species, we see them referring to environmental displays in the cockpit, showing both topological data and energy readings. And after they search through the depths of the structure, the team discovers Saw Gerrera, and then a Geonosian named Click-Clack, who is warning of some strange circular object, and guarding a Geonosian egg. The Ghost would have to make a narrow descent through the cave opening after the enemy had spotted this ship and realized what a catch it would be.
Imperial records identify it as the Ghost from Phoenix Squadron.
The Ghost? If we destroy that ship, it would mean a promotion for all of us.
Meanwhile, Saul was not being respectful in his friend's home, threatening to kidnap Click-Clack and steal the Phantom II, angry at the slow and cautious methods of everyone but his partisans. As they fled the Imperial waves of attack, they descended further, finding gas canisters used to fumigate the hives and carry out this genocide, attaching them to the Ghost like cargo containers. And on their way out, the Arquitans tries to stop them, but Hera saw an opening.
Their captain is showing their inexperience.
All hands, fire forward batteries! Sabine, fire proton torpedoes!
But this maneuver would knock loose the evidence. Following this, it would be on Ghost that Fen Rao would explain the history of the Darksaber, and while running a refuel mission, we can see massive tanks attached to each side being used to refuel a Taylan shuttle that would be revealed to contain Mon Mothma. The Empire knew the sway she would have over countless worlds, and threw everything they could into finding her, including the newest ship in the TIE line, the fast, deadly, shielded, and hyperdrive-enabled TIE Defender. Mothma would be forced to take refuge in the Ghost, and in trying to lose the Imps by crossing through the Archon Nebula, the ship suffered intense radiation, only to run into a pair of ISDs. Mothma stalled while they calculated a hyper route, but it wasn't long before this freighter was pulled up by the Star Destroyer's tractor beam. Hera tells the Y-Wings to fire their proton torpedoes into the nebula, exactly what they were avoiding while passing through it, but it now worked to unleash a massive burst of plasma and radiation that worked to overwhelm the systems in the capital ships, dropping the tractor and allowing them to jump to Dantooine, where Mothma would make one of the most important speeches in galactic history aboard the Ghost.
We will not rest until we bring an end to the Empire, until we restore our Republic. Are you with me?
They would then turn their efforts to the liberation of Lothal. At first they wanted to steal Imperial codes, sending Chopper and AP-5 to go undercover, but the C-1 would be spotted by a sharp-eyed slicer, and the droid was hijacked after it ported into the station. With an Imperial in control of Chopper, they searched his memory banks and see this may lead them to the capture of the near-mythical Spectres and the Rebels' new hidden base. Chop would place a spike and transmit data to the Imps, and they try to lock everyone in the cargo bay before opening it up to the void of space. Hera deduces what must have happened and backhacks them, taking it personally and ensuring she overloaded the modified Imperial spy Gazanti. Thrawn was able to figure out the location of Chopper Base, and one of the largest battles since the Clone Wars was quickly underway. 6 Star Destroyers, 2 Arquitans, and 2 Interdictors were in orbit, and the Rebels knew their only chance was to create an opening for Ezra to escape and to get help from their Mandalorian allies. Jun Sato watched as his friends were being killed all around him and gave orders for his crew to abandon ship, and crashed his carrier into the gravity well generating cruiser in order to give Ezra a chance to jump to hyperspace. Hera would lead their decimated forces back to their base, and after their shield generator held up against the orbital bombardment, Thrawn personally led the ground assault. When all seemed lost, aid would come from the mysterious Force wielder, the Bendu, along with Ezra and the Mandalorians. All the rebel ships scattered, as Force lightning at a scale the Sith could only dream of was raining down and giving the Ghost a chance to race away, forcing some of the tightest flying yet through swarms of TIE fighters, making sure to rescue their Imperial defector friend Agent Kallus, locking in his escape pod to the underside of the Ghost as the stunned imps watched them make the jump. Hera would tell them to plot 3 hyperspace jumps before they went to the rendezvous on Yavin 4, and at this base, Saw would make his appeal to those who made up the Rebel Alliance, calling Mothma a coward who would sacrifice the entire galaxy on the altar of her supposed virtues. But if they wanted to win, the rebels should be joining the partisans. Hours later, the Spectres were off to place a spike in an Imperial relay, using the cargo door like a military aircraft to drop in Ezra, Chopper, and Sabine. And after they were detected, it was a chaotic mess trying to make it out alive, with the Arquitans releasing its TIE defenders. A pair of these new TIEs was able to push Hera to the point that she had to use the fog and Kanan's vision in the Force in order to get the upper hand. All while Saw Gerrera had arrived in his U-Wing, dropping off proton bombs and picking up the Spectres. Syndulla was confused and then worried when she heard who it was that saved them, made worse when an ISD appeared and forced them to quickly split up to escape. Saw brought them in on his mission to investigate the rumors of enormous kyber crystals being used in the Empire's superweapon program. While Saw was set simply on destruction, Hera was happy to see that her Spectres were focused on saving the innocent civilians that were trapped on board the transport. The Ghost would swoop in to save them, all of whom would become dedicated members of the Rebel Alliance. The liberation of Lothal would require the movement of several pieces, including some tips from the old pirate Hondo on how to smuggle the Ghost past the Imperial blockade, and would play a pivotal role in the battle that would capture Arenda Price. Before they carried on to their second stage, the most difficult part that would either lead to their destruction or the final liberation of his homeworld, Ezra spoke to the image of his late parents and the ship that he had called home for 4 years, using Price to gain access to the portable Imperial command center that was the base of the enemy's power on Lothal. Ezra and Thrawn would go missing as their enigmatic allies, the Purrgil, showed up to drag the flagship, the Chimera, into hyperspace to some unknown location. With the base filled with explosives, they would send it far above the city before making their escape via the Ghost, being flown by the young pilot Sato. To see the fireworks show, the entire city was out on their feet, cheering as the symbol of their savior, the Ghost, soared overhead in its victory lap. Less than a year later, now General Syndulla would be on Yavin 4 with Chopper, helping continue the fight during the Battle of Scarif, a part of the largest showing of the Rebel Alliance power thus far, the Ghost popping out of hyperspace for the epic battle that would deliver the Death Star plans into the hands of Leia Organa. Over the next 4 years, the Ghost would continue to strike fear into the Imperials all across the stars, culminating in the Battle of Endor. After the Emperor was killed, and the galaxy was celebrating the dismantling of the Empire, after more than 2 decades of fighting, she had victory at last. And in the following days, the General would set up camp near Solos, and she would finally get another long sought after personal win.
The Ghost is a superior ship to the Falcon.
Even though Leia was good friends with Hera, she made sure her husband knew where she stood.
By the way, no one believes the Ghost is a superior ship to the Falcon.
A year later, General Syndulla would be aboard a monument to her service and leadership, her very own Star Destroyer named Deliverance, which she took into the Battle of Jakku to finish the fight against the Imperial Remnant. When it took heavy damage, she ran to her hangar to take the Ghost into battle, which would be considered the final battle of the Empire, all later forms being merely a particular warlord and then the First Order. While the galaxy came into an era of greater peace than it had seen in more than 4 decades, Hera was making sure the next generation enjoyed her ship, her beloved home, as her and Kanan's son, Jason, loved to ride with his mom, a mom who was surely surprised that she could love flying even more, sharing it with her little co-pilot. Though these moments were to be savored, deep down she knew that the fight would need to be continued, that somewhere Ezra was out there lost in space, and Thrawn was preparing his return, a story which is yet to be told. And when the Chiss's old master, the true incarnate evil of the galaxy, proved to be alive after all these years, the Ghost was part of the largest galactic alliance of ships, leading the charge right behind its rival, the Millennium Falcon, to destroy the Sith once and for all. That's it for the breakdown. As for behind the scenes facts, the Ghost was first introduced at Celebration Europe 2 in 2013, in concept art for the Rebel series, receiving great applause, and it was rolled out with a series of Rebel pins that contained clues to find the ship's schematics online, found on the article Seen a Ghost on StarWars.com. The cockpit was inspired by the real-world Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, and it was designed for a ship called the Silver Angel, which was scrapped once the final episodes of the Clone Wars were left unfinished, but the Silver Angel will be brought to life with Season 7's return, being used by the Martez sisters. And then there was an insanely obscure reference in the KX-4 laser cannon turret, which was first mentioned in the novel Shatterpoint released in 2003, on board a Turbostorm class gunship. If you made it this far, please hit that like button, leave a comment, share the video, and subscribe to see more. And thanks again to our sponsor, Pixel Starships. If you're in the ship warfare, customization, space exploration, you're gonna love it, so check out the link in the description. But most important of all, remember, the specter of sleeper freighters have always haunted the Empire, and the Force will be with you, always. What's up, MetaNerds? In this complete breakdown of the Vigil class corvette, we're going to see a lot of different things, from why it was so impressive, how it was able to punch above its weight, how it served both to protect the fringes of the galaxy and would also make for a great base of operations for rebel groups, even Mandos and pirates, and how certain design features may challenge the orthodoxy of the Kuat Drive Yard's designs, with some rather compelling conspiracies around that. I want to mention some of the other channels we have, like the book club vibes over at MetaNerdz, the gaming channel, and Timeless, where we're reading stories. All that's linked down in the description if you want to check it out, as well as a 10% off code on things like these cool MOC builds over at Geeky Grotto. But with that, let's get into it. The Vigil class was created by Kuat Drive Yards, the people that win every war and provide most of the ships and vehicles for the Republic and Empire, pumping out this at a cost of 3.5 million credits, making it 1/17 the cost of the Venator, and at a length of 225 meters or 837 feet, it was 22% the length of the Venator. This would make it the smallest vessel in the iconic Star Destroyer line of ships that bore the KDY seal. The classic dagger-shaped hull design makes it easy to tell it wasn't crafted by the fish hands over on Mon Cala or the Free Dak boys, but the look, along with the heavy armament, all stayed within the military philosophy of the Star Destroyers. Where it differs significantly is the design of the command deck, which now sits flush with the hull, still to the aft and over the main drive engines. This gave it a much smaller silhouette and better protection from the logically targeted attack on the command section of the entire destroyer. Just cut the head off the snake by attacking here, like we saw with everything from Ventress doing great damage with a simple Genevex, to the greatest upset in history when an A-Wing gave us this iconic takedown of a super Star Destroyer during the Battle of Endor by simply crashing into it. May the Force guide your mind to peace, not to question too much, and wonder why all weaponry, and droid ships like the Vultures, just don't always constantly bombard this area. Because there's also the issue of if Kuat could, and was willing to, and did this for the Vigil, then why didn't we see this used more often? And why were there so many excuses made for the massive sticking out tower? To cut them some slack, even the fish folk did it on some of their ships like the Providence, but most of the MC series of course would go with the seamless design like the Vigil. The reason given was that it was nice for the commanders in the deck to be able to get eyes on the battle, and if your deck was buried in the hull, then any electrical issues would leave you blind both to sensors, and you'd have no ability to get organic eyes on the situation. With ion weapons specifically designed to disable electronics, seen perfectly with Y-Wings delivering ion torpedoes during the Battle of Scarif, just a handful turning off an entire ISD, you could see why commanders might be nervous about relying on just cameras. I'm the first guy to point out that KDY and Palpatine are willing to sacrifice their own to push their own agendas. The ships that get destroyed will always be a vast minority. There's a complex fleet in place, so it isn't like the design aspect will lead to complete failure. Maybe only 5 to 10% more losses, which is a great sales boost to a company of this scale. And you actually do want some dramatic upset losses to fuel your Republic or Imperial propaganda efforts. The footage of a memorial service for top commanders, maybe even Jedi killed, and the powerful image of flaming Venators goes a long way to keep up passionate support for the war effort and the hatred of the Seppies, or later rebels. When anyone says that they're not that big a threat, you could point to actual footage of them taking out these massive Star Destroyers. But all that considered, I don't think there's some conspiracy here with the Vigil. This is a corvette, so it should be on the outer fringes of the fleet, one of the first to receive contact, and its armament and complement reflect that, with a decent array of options. And so because it was expected to take the most amount of damage, maybe that's why we don't see a prominent command deck sticking out. Its primary armament is a trio of twin heavy turbolaser turrets, so 6 bolts of the same quality as a full-size Star Destroyer, all located along the dorsal hull, and which give it one of the greatest size-to-power ratios, punching far above most in its class. Also up top, we get the 3 twin light turbolaser turrets, which are good for just about everything from compounding damage on the largest ships out there to bringing down big transports. And then on the ventral side, we get 3 multi-laser cannon turrets, which are better for starfighters and bombers. They're close to, but not exactly, point defense laser cannons, which are considered the best for shooting down small, nimble craft. Perhaps they felt that the complement made up for that. We don't get precise numbers on the amount of ships that it could hold, but given that its overall length is only 32 times a TIE fighter, it's not going to be spewing out endless swarms of fighters, maybe a squadron or two, which seem to be released via this retractable hangar. I love the ventral hangar deployment system. As cool as the dorsal opening hangar on the Venator is, it just seems more vulnerable to incoming attack. That might seem silly in space combat where up and down don't matter, but tell them that. Incoming fire is always straight on and above, especially with the command towers up top, so that's why the ventral hangar on the Venator always seemed the safer route to me. Funny enough, this corvette with no ventral side tower drawing topside fire is the only one that makes sure to deploy via the bottom, if you will. You might think of the Acclimator, but it's not used in nearly the same role, and it has this smaller, often overlooked hangar hatch up top, but even that's not really used for military vessels, more for moving around VIPs and taking in cargo. So again, with Star Wars battles playing out like they're on a flat ocean surface, and this corvette meant to be the first to be engaged, sending out squadrons of fighters and interceptors, releasing them from below makes a lot of sense. And it could carry bombers as well, depending on the mission. And I'd imagine commanders would want a few bomber-packing corvettes just for that unexpected finishing power, swooping in to deliver targeted strikes when the full-size turbolasers of the Vigil took down the shields. It was also the medium tractor beam emitters. Now, while this giant dish could be it, we do see that there's 3 similar dishes on the Cantwell-class arrestor cruiser. These are the state-of-the-art RT-17 repulsor tractor beam emitters. But the Vigil is listed as having multiple beam emitters. And while that could mean that they're all concentrated through this dish, there's also a ton of other ships with tractor beams that do not have big, obvious projectors like the Cantwell. Star Destroyers often have more and powerful ones than the Vigil, and they're not obvious. So I think this is just for long-range communication, and the projectors might actually be in these circles if we look at other cross-sections and guides to tractor beam emitters on other ships. I think tractor beams are one of the most underappreciated tools out there, and would be especially good for picket ships to pin down enemies while they called for more backup, using that big dish to call for backup. Because some of its stated roles were all corvette, picket ship, scout craft, and escort. It had a crew of 200, which is shockingly only 3% of the Venator. Crew sizes do sort of scale to size, so to be 25% the size of a Venator and only requiring 3% of the crew to operate, this does make it incredibly efficient. And it could also transport 200 passengers, which could be used to evac civilians, but also move troops. And they had enough consumables for a year. No number on the tonnage of cargo, but it had to be equivalent to at least thousands of pounds of jerk dewback. And all these traits, from the firepower to efficiency, allowed the late Republic, and more so the Empire, to use these as patrols in the more obscure regions of the galaxy, which of course would always be the very same places pirates and rebels were hanging out. The Vigil would live up to its name, staying vigilant and keeping watch in areas that anti-imperialists thought that they could invade the all-seeing eye of Sidious. It would get a sort of promotion in the sense that where it was originally designed to be on the fringes of fleets, with the Venators being the anchors, it came to become a battle group leader of the backwater fleets. And sometimes it would even operate alone, with the only sense of a fleet being that it coordinated the movement of its complements of ships that it released. But once these all became TIE fighters, there wasn't a lot of long-range ops that could be coordinated since the TIEs don't have a hyperdrive. The Vigil did have a Class 2 hyperdrive, which is slower than the Venator but equal to the ISD. So if that big dish is the long-range comms, then it explains why we get details about this ship operating alone in a scouting role. With all its firepower, if it did poke its nose into a rebel or pirate nest, it would likely survive long enough to make it out or at least send the transmissions. But if they could capture one of these, it would make for a great rebel ship. With those long-range comms, it punches far above its size while having a low crew requirement and isn't dependent on missiles or other difficult-to-get items. There would be room for some X-Wings, A-Wings, or Y-Wings, which all have hyperdrives, and I could easily see this being used by a Rebel or Mando Spec Ops team. Now we see it here in the Naval Station Valaducia in the expansion region, and this was all used to refuel Imperial ships. Also in this image are Assertor-class Star Dreadnoughts, 1 Bellator-class Dreadnought, 3 Allegiance-class battlecruisers, along with a Secutor and many Imperial classes, as well as Altor-class replenishment ships, Lambdas, Alpha XG-1s, and TIE Defenders. That's it for the breakdown of the Vigil-class corvette. Please hit that like button, it's the best way to help me out, and YouTube's making that more important than ever. Leave a comment and check out these videos, I'm sure you'll like them. Check the description and comments for some of our other projects and ways to help support the channel. But most important of all, remember, sometimes military equipment isn't flawed, it's actually perfectly fulfilling its secret goals. And the Force will be with you, always.
Yeah, the Mantis is my ship, but you better pay attention to this lady here.
What's up, MetaNerdz? I'm going to do a complete breakdown of the Mantis, from size to armament, interior and exterior tour, and history, using footage from Jedi Survivor. And there will be a major spoiler towards the end, and I'll make sure to give a very clear warning first. It was manufactured by Latero Spaceworks, which is incredibly obscure. In fact, it's the only known ship produced by them, and points to them being a local operation just making ships for the Latero species. Grease Dritus' people, who hailed from the planet Lateron in the Mid-Rim. There isn't much data on them, but they were clearly a capable spacefaring people, with the only famous institution we know of being Lateron Space Academy. Their people stayed out of galactic affairs, and were lucky enough to be away from major hyperspace points and didn't have any rare resources that drew outsiders. A sweet spot where they weren't some far-off, isolated backwater, but nothing interesting enough was going on here to attract the more violent alien conquerors. They lived in comfort and spread throughout their own solar system, with the Academy producing excellent pilots, operating Latero Spacework gems like the S-161 Stinger XL. The name alone implies that this is the larger variant of the S-161, and the size is crazy, and we'll see that it's rightly classified as a luxury yacht. Keep in mind there are still no official stats for this. We can figure out everything using Cal as a reference. With Cal at a height of 1.82 meters or 6 feet, we get a height for the main body at 6.9 meters or 23 feet, with a total height to the tip of the enormous wing at 22.5 meters or 74 feet. This means the main body was about a Wookiee shorter than a TIE fighter, while the wingtip is even with an AT-AT, down to the decimal, so I don't think that's an accident. And it might be a cool look at the art team wanting it to be as tall as the iconic walker. At a width of 15 meters or 49 feet, it was more than twice the width of the TIE, or a trio of Jawas wider than the X-Wing. While at a length of 29 meters or 95 feet, it was 75% of a sandcrawler and 60% the yacht Lady Luck, which was owned by Lando. And if it showed up here on Earth, it would be about 7 stories tall, and 1/6 the largest yacht in the world, the Rev. The most unique feature of this ship is the rotating wing design, inspired in part by the T6 shuttle, B-Wing, Commerk, and Fang, but the way it works is unique. When in flight, this third engine on its own small wing would lock into the larger one, and could fully rotate 360 degrees around the ship, providing for precise controls, as you have the 2 larger engines on the body providing thrust, and the third being able to move independently for a more advanced type of thrust vectoring. Like in a fighter jet, the nozzle can move a bit to amplify the effects of the wing flaps and rudders. Since normal wings don't move, just the wing flaps, and the ship would turn a separate rudder, the Mantis combines all of this into a single unit, and this design shows us that it originally must have been intended to soar through the atmospheres of Lateran planets, capable in space but optimized for in-atmosphere flight. And keep in mind this is a luxury yacht. We first see it with a ragtag rebel group, but it was designed for the wealthy and politically powerful. And like our ancestors, the ancient Lateran would have romanticized stories of grand old sailing vessels. And just like how we link wood to being luxury, put in high-end cars, jets, or yachts, we can't ignore the factor that peacocking played in the design of the S-161 XL. If you got the XL version, you were pulling up to the billionaire meet to say your yacht is nice, but mine's bigger. And I hate that you might not look at it the same, but there's a bit of phallic one-upism, along with the profile of an old sailing yacht, with this wing being like a large mast, which could have been painted to show off unique colors, crests, or logos, all broadcasting who owned this masterpiece, and overall being a combo of technological practicality, while trying to evoke old money heritage. Back to the breakdown. When it was landing, the wing would rotate the side engine pod into a vertical position, lock that part in place, and then rotate back to an upright position, while a trio of landing gear extended, which had enormous foot pads and overall width to accommodate for all this weight. These orange lights are probably just indicators to show that this area is receiving power. The ship diagnostics inside would have shown any issues, but this could be a useful redundancy, and make it so mechanics wouldn't have to go all the way inside and turn everything on just to see issues. While these green ones could be small ion thrusters used for precision movements when landing, giving you lateral options like thrusters seen on real-world spacecraft. And we see them inside of this side engine, and at the rear under the main engines. It makes perfect sense that these are small ion thrusters, except for this one up top that has a pipe going right through it. Because all the other ones are in logical positions, you even have one up top and another one underneath, giving you thrust in every direction for precision landing. While these circles with the red and white dots are likely power cells. An often used plot point is that the heroes have to find new ones after it gets destroyed in combat or they fry out, and it makes it so you have everything running off not just one source. Usually used for all sorts of auxiliary systems like shielding and comms, which are usually covered by these panels, though some areas are left exposed This exposure could help with radiating heat, which was mostly handled by the large radiator at the rear, and there are several other venting spots throughout, being both for the enormous heat generation from the engines and cannons, while others just seem to be for climate control in the ship. To look at the engines, I want to start by heading inside. When this was fully staffed for its powerful owner, I think it's intended that this area would be staffed by multiple engineers. With all these panels showing data screens like the position in space, obstacles, the local solar system, and larger view of the galaxy, there's numbers and other screens which only technicians can understand. Most of these screens are usually only seen in the cockpit, so since these would be important for navigation, all these buttons and screen must pull up different data, control systems like comms, shifting the shield focus towards potential collisions with asteroids, and plotting out paths through space, with all this intel being able to be sent up front to the co-pilot and pilot. This whirling plasma chamber is a view of both the main reactor and the hyperdrive, this circle in the middle. Like we saw with the J-type Nubian yacht, this panel hyperdrive unit is pressed seamlessly against the chamber, just a luxury touch and novelty, and likely could be popped out with the press of a button for servicing. By looking at the cross-sections of similar ships, we can see what all these tubes are leading into, with each pumping the fuel that would be ionized in the ionization chamber, the combustion chamber where the highly energized particles would be focused out the exhaust, with the tubes carrying it all to 6 smaller nozzles that make up each single thruster engine, with these panels opening or narrowing to focus the thrust and adjust speed. If we go towards the cockpit, you can see that while it has a sort of U-wing shape, even similar laser cannons, which might even be heavy laser cannons, in the nose shape that overall comes to this sloping point, but unlike the U-wing, there are no windows up top, though there are a ton of windows around the side and below. Called a belly-mounted cockpit, at least they do make sure to have a small moonroof up here. Stepping into the pilot's seat, we can see these are premium materials, and there's all sorts of panels mirrored from the engineering section, so that it can be flown with a single pilot if you had to. While built as a luxury craft, they must have had a bit of a pirate problem because the targeting computer and fire controls take priority in this space, being right on the yoke, while environmental and ship status data are on these screens, with more info over here, and a special emergency hyperdrive activator up here. Perhaps it picks a already trusted hyperspace lane, with the ship already having a safe, calculated lane on standby, because you see that Grease doesn't need to pull this to enter hyperspace every time. Or it works as an emergency override, and the first time we see it used, Grease was so shook that he just went anywhere. The co-pilot would be able to more closely monitor other data, while this third seat was for comms, to broadcast, jam, or even hack into other ships. If we look up, we see another massive amount of buttons, no clue what they could do, and turning we see storage areas, more inputs and panels, with this fourth seat that seems to be just for a passenger, or maybe even a flight attendant, when this was operating like a private jet. You could see them using this as a prep area, and this door could close for the privacy of the passengers. Moving aft, we see the holo terminal room, which originally could have been used for pure recreation as it could play movies, work for making holo calls, or display things when searching the holoweb, with seating for 8, but you could pack more in here. Either of these doors could open up to drop the ramp. Next up is the lounge with seats and a simple table, but also hydroponics like automated growth chambers, here growing a ton of mushrooms. And coming up the steps, we get to a display area, and then the galley. There are some storage areas for food with these things that look like they could be more for indoor food growing devices, but these blocks make me think it's just a refrigerator. He has a sort of portable stove that also might work like an Instapot. This is some sort of juicer, or maybe calf, the word for coffee in the galaxy far, far away. With these trio of devices being slightly different, just look at the circles on the panels, so maybe there's some sort of fryer or a different type of food storage. I love the attention to detail with all the utensils, types of cups and plates. Something really cool is that if you're sitting in these chairs, you can see out of these side windows. They're really thin, but I love that they're trying to give you as much natural light and scenic views as possible. And if you look up, you get amazing views through another large window. Continuing through, we come to this area with even more buttons, and then these 3 rooms. Likely all bedrooms, hopefully at least one having a bathroom, aka refresher. And then we arrive at the engineering quarters, and with this bed arrangement here, it might just be a Grease creation, but I could see it working like that 4th chair in the nook in the cockpit, with a team of engineers having a place to take shifts, sleeping here while at least one other engineer would be alert and operating everything. This ladder takes you down to the maintenance area, and behind this door I would imagine you have more direct access to other crucial ship systems, like fuel and sorts of breaker panels for electrical systems. Now as for its history, we have to start with how Grease acquired it. I doubt he came from a wealthy family, but if he did, perhaps his family business was destroyed by the Empire, and his parents gave it to him as a way to escape with this expensive yacht, hoping he would just sell it off and settle down somewhere, only for Grease to use it to fight the Empire. But I think most likely he won at gambling, a classic trope in a galaxy far, far away.
Heard about a high-stakes game from one of Saw's fighters. A few extra credits couldn't hurt, you know?
Gambling? Grease, use your head. One of these days, the Haxian brood is going to catch up with you.
Before you came along, all I cared about was a tight hand on a stiff heater. That's a game term.
We know that one slight that always stuck with him was that he couldn't get into the private cantina at the academy back home, but he clearly was an ace pilot, and he treated this thing like his baby.
I don't care who he's with. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get oil stains out of petroleum fabric?
Another interesting convo shows us that their ships and culture don't integrate droids like other people.
What is that thing saying? I don't know why people have droids. Droids just freak me out.
With his 4 arms, he mastered this setup and didn't need a co-pilot poking around.
I don't need another set of hands. Just please keep your eye on the scanner, please.
Instead, the co-pilot was to watch the sensor arrays, while Seer would often use the advanced jamming and comm tech to spy on nearby imps. The doors could be opened up to drop Callan behind enemy lines, and the holo terminal was used both for displays but also for holo calls, while Marin stunned everybody by using her Night Sister magic to work like a cloaking device. Now here, we're starting with some light spoilers, but I will eventually mention a major spoiler towards the end. So there's your warning, progressively worse spoilers from here. After narrowly escaping Coruscant, we see the holo terminal used to perform a ship diagnostic, and that the comm station could send heavily encrypted data through a hyperwave transmission across the galaxy, while BD could use the holo terminal to play home movies he recorded. After they learn the gyro was failing, they go to nearby Kobo to meet up with Grease. Other systems start failing too, and after a tough crash landing, eventually they find a gyro and get everything working again. And then, again, major spoiler here, when they finally do get through the abyss, they have to do it in one of the largest ships out here, weaving through these obstacles in an AT-AT sized profile. In a way that Cal uses this hyperdrive activator also points to it being a manual override. But when they do get the compass, we see that they'll be using Tanalorr as a way to hide refugees from the Empire. The compass should be able to work with any ship out there, so while the Mantis is great, imagine a luxury yacht whisking you to freedom, and it could be packed full of people. It also has to be on all the Imperial wanted lists, so you could put the compass in more nimble ships for escaping blockades, or larger transports for hundreds of people at a time. Which, being a point on the hidden path, this could include Jedi, helping to restore Tanalorr as a remote Jedi academy. As for behind the scenes facts, this vent towards the front is just like these ones on the Millennium Falcon, but this was for heat coming from the engine array. But the Mantis has it towards the living area up front, so maybe it's just to vent Grease is cooking.
Hey, does anybody else smell something burning?
Although there's no official stats yet, there are great details in the Art of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order book, which shows concept art and mentions that Doug Chang and Ryan Church were consulted, both of them working on art teams from the prequel movies up through The Mandalorian. And a lot of details for other ships come from these books. Please hit that like button, it's the best way to help me out. Subscribe so you don't miss things, check out these other videos, but most important of all, remember, a ship is only as good as its pilot, and the Force will be with you, always.
Foolish Republic scum! Your puny torpedoes are no match for my thermo shields.
What's up, MetaNerds? This will be a complete breakdown of the Providence-class dreadnought, one of the most important ships in the CIS Navy. We'll look at everything from firepower, complement, capacity, and how it shaped the Clone Wars. Specific ships like the Invincible, Lucid Voice, and Invisible Hand, and even how the scraps of these ships would come to haunt the Imperial era, an attempt to destroy Tarkin's rise to power. This capital ship was both designed and constructed by the Quarren of the Free DAC Volunteers Engineering Corps, with collaboration in some parts coming from Rendili Star Drive. The Quarren shared their homeworld DAC with the Mon Calamari, and like the old phrase says, coral sharpens coral, or something like that. And just as the Mon Calamari were famed for being the best engineers in the galaxy for most of history, so much so that their prowess would end up providing the Rebel Alliance with a powerful edge, their rivalry drove the Quarren to be excellent shipwrights also. At the time of the Clone Wars, the tension between these two species came to a head. Mon Calamari had always seen themselves as the more wise and peaceful of the two, and the galaxy seemed to agree, with almost all political power and wealth ending up in the hands of the fish folk, not the Squidbillies. So it's a small-scale example of what happened to the galaxy as a whole, with the secession of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, and Dooku knew that the Quarren would make for a natural ally. This secession occurred about 2 years before the war officially broke out, and while the founding of the Free DAC Volunteer Engineering Corps is stated at 22 BBY, we can assume that construction of these massive warships began at a time when it was still illegal under Republic law. Mon Calamari shipyards could pump out a star cruiser in 6 months, and the Empire at its peak was claiming anywhere from 3 months to 2 years to build an Imperial Star Destroyer. So let's say around a year for a Providence, likely constructed in those years leading up to the Battle of Geonosis. The Quarren shipyard was located on the planet Pamant, which already had a several millennia-old colony of anti-Calamarians, and these Pamant docks would be a main shipyard for the Confederacy, producing almost all of the capital ships, including the experimental Malevolence. The Providence cost 125 million credits, while it seems that the larger version that is twice its size, like the Invincible, cost 400,585,000 credits, which is more than twice the Imperial Star Destroyer. Powered by 3 Crevealed 4 radial ion engines, which were made by Nubia Star Drives, the producer of most of Naboo's ships, these top-of-the-line engines reached a max acceleration of 2,500 G and 70 megalight per hour, with a top atmospheric speed of 2,000 kilometers per hour, which made it faster than almost all starfighters, and would leave other capital ships in the dust, while being more than twice the Venator, which was known for its speed. And though the Venator was quicker in hyperspace, the Class 1.5 hyperdrive puts the Providence right in between the Venator and ISD. To achieve this, the entire aft section was filled with primary and auxiliary reactors, while there were also subsidiary reactors and hyperdrive fuel silos located towards the bow, right below the command bridge, which provided a 180-degree view of the battlefront, and was packed with the best sensor and navigational equipment credits could buy, as well as a suite of dedicated computers to track everything going on inside of the Providence, track the starfighters connected on the surface of it, and of course how they were deployed out in space. With scanners that could reach out to search through entire solar systems and send out encrypted messages through hyper relays all across the galaxy in an instant, with incredibly complex arrays filling up this spire, an area that was connected by 5 turbolifts, with the uppermost part of the spire containing the private quarters of the warship's commanding officer. On Dooku's Providence, they nicknamed it the Wizard's Tower, as he would set it up like a meditation chamber. And just like how Sidious could choke out people via holo, Dooku would try to radiate his will into populations through a unique form of propaganda that combined force suggestion and high-tech broadcast equipment. In the Old Republic times, there was the practice of battle meditations, where powerful force users could increase the will of their fighters.
Bastila is no longer using her battle meditation against us. The tide has turned.
So it's interesting to wonder if the Providence was ever used for this purpose during the Clone Wars. Like the rounded shapes of the Mon Cala craft, the Quarrens used a streamlined modular design to construct the Providence, with a large cylinder at the center, and then more tubes to circle around that one, cutting away where they connect to create a really powerful and aerodynamic design. A unique geometry that dispersed the weight better than most competitors. And just because they spent a lot of time in space, all warships were still designed to travel through diverse planetary atmospheres as well, with emergency deceleration panels that can be used to rapidly slow down, so that if you wanted to, you could take full advantage of its speed and slam the brakes with a combo of reversing the thrusters. And this isn't explicitly stated anywhere, but most ships could also go underwater, especially the Mon Calamari design, and so it's reasonable to think that's true for the Quarren designs as well. This hull is also covered in hundreds of smaller sensors and comms that work to communicate with the droid starfighters, that could connect to just about anywhere on the outside of the ship for quicker deployment, or if the mission required them to pack on short term while you really filled up that hangar.
General Grievous's ship is directly ahead, the one crawling with vulture droids.
But besides that, the standard complement was 120 vultures, 120 tri-fighters, 10 hyena bombers, usually all lining the hangar and connected to overhead racks, while right underneath this section is where the 160 MTTs, and roughly 280 vehicles in any combo of AATs, Hailfire droids, OG-9 Spider droids, and M9 432 Crab droids. With all these land vehicles usually packing into a C-9979 landing craft that transferred down to a planet's surface like with the Lucrehulks. The 900 crew members included organic officers, but was mostly droids, while it could transport 48,247 passengers, which is how these things were used for a great PR role when they evacuated whole settlements from the lawless pirates or corrupt Republic forces. And along with them, they had 1.5 million deactivated, stored battle droids packed in as well, with a 18,000 metric ton cargo capacity, which was used to move war materiel or relief aid for CIS worlds. The weapon systems and shielding were powerful enough to match, designed to be so strong that a single Providence could maintain a planetary blockade through expert use of the starfighter complement, speed, and firepower. Many of these guns were charged at a higher rate, and the number of guns in each battery were designed to pierce through the deflector shields of most ships out there, with its 14 port and starboard heavy quad turbolaser cannons, 34 dorsal and ventral turret-mounted dual heavy laser cannons, 12 port and starboard twin light point defense ion cannons, and 2 forward-mounted battleship heavy ion cannons, as well as 102 proton torpedo launchers, with each carrying 3 torpedoes. And then you had 12 heavy flak guns and 10 heavy tractor beam emitters placed along its port and starboard side, which all makes for a brilliant and great purpose-built dreadnought. Remember, it is incredibly fast, and its speed would be shocking to even the most veteran pilots out there, something that forced the Republic to play catch-up early on in the war. All these heavy-rated weaponry are for punching through capital ships while leaving the anti-starfighter role to the point defense cannons, using less energy since they are just ion cannons, and so they could leave an enemy starfighter or vessel dead in space, letting the vultures or hyenas blow them to bits, allowing for the Providence to focus on the main enemy craft. The two heavy ion cannons are forward-facing, for a full steam-ahead attack that would short out the enemy shield generators and unleash its proton torpedoes, with that large forward beak-like rostrum for ramming into a ship if the need arose. If the enemy was to the side, the heavy cannons could overwhelm the shields, and let the port or starboard tractor beams keep the target in place for a barrage of torpedoes and then let the droid fighters swarm and envelop them. While on defense, this enormous credit investment was protected by a state-of-the-art thermal shielding, which was able to handle long barrages of even heavy turbolaser fire. Now there were some variants like the Providence carrier, which enlarged this hangar, likely stripping away the passenger and maybe even the B-1 droid troop sections, as well as the simply named larger model, which is almost exactly double the size of the standard version. At 2,177.35 meters long, or 1.35 miles, it was nearly twice the Venator, longer than an ISD, but still half that of a subjugator. Having a supersized version of the same ship might seem odd, but they did the same thing with the Requisite too. And the standard size Providence was actually shorter than the standard Requisite, despite being more powerful, while being less than half as wide as a Venator and about 1.5 times taller, though that height is mostly in these spires. And if it showed up here on Earth, it would be between the height of the Eiffel Tower and Empire State Building. You'll see as we look through its history that it is often the command ship of large CIS fleets, being the home base using its vast array of sensors and protective cloud of fire to act like a fortress, a wall other CIS vessels could retreat behind if need be, and from which the commander would coordinate the entire mission. Though none of the major CIS capital ships would be present during the Battle of Geonosis, or more accurately the evacuation of Geonosis by CIS leadership, days later General Worm Loathsome would head the siege of Christophsis, in the CIS's hopes to cut off the Republic access to the Corellian Run, sending a fleet that included 23 Munificents, 6 Lucrehulks, and a Providence to coordinate them all. While the General would lead the fight planetside, this particular Providence was the Invincible, the flagship of the infamous Admiral Trench. Republic Admiral Yularen recognized the Harch Admiral from before the war, at a time when Trench was the commander of corporate fleets. His command of this supersized Providence is evidence that he was the best admiral in the CIS. Anakin would attempt a rescue mission to Christophsis, and Trench showed why his style paired so well with this powerful dreadnought.
The command ship is bearing down on us!
Though the command ship, he sees that he can crush this smaller fleet of 3 Venators and 3 Pelta-class medical frigates. It's obvious that they are attempting a blockade run, not trying to clear out the entire blockade, and so he uses the ship's speed to close the gap in hopes of forcing them to retreat. The sheer firepower of the Venator demanded respect, so it isn't that Trench thinks this trio can't do anything to him, but by being so aggressive with this larger variant, he can make the Republic Admiral realize that there was no hope at just blowing through a gap in the blockade. Best case, they would lose most of their ships just engaging this single Providence. When Kenobi arrives with his Venator, the Negotiator, he assures his Padawan that they had a secret weapon, and they need to retreat for now. Frustrated, Skywalker does comply, and Republic forces retreat behind the moon. T-Series droid TI-99 recommended they pursue, but Trench disagrees.
They are escaping. Should we go after them? No! Our orders are to blockade, not chase. I have won this round. Recycle the shields and let the cannons reset to a full charge.
He knows the biggest advantage is the thermal shielding, and the power of those heavy cannons and torpedoes. The prototype stealth ship would emerge from behind the moon and pass right by the Munificence on its approach to Christophsis, while Trench was ordering the bombers to be launched to finish off Bail Organa's Republic forces. This worked to pressure Kenobi to rush to Bail's defense and engage, which leads both Skywalker and Yularen to agree that Kenobi was wrong here, that Trench was baiting him, and though Skywalker is the only one crazy enough to think to use the stealth prototype against this supersized dreadnought.
Sir?
You heard me, Admiral.
What are you doing?
And even Trench is surprised.
This is unusual. What can they be planning?
Minutes later, he can tell something is off, and spots the ship the second it decloaks.
There! A cloaked ship!
The Republic knew to target the command bridge right up front, but the shielding did its job.
Your puny torpedoes are no match for my thermo shields.
While the cannon fire tries to hit them, and Trench can tell by this expert piloting that his enemy is a Jedi pilot, not a clone. The ship was able to go stealth again, and Trench knows he just has to wait, while also launching some psychological weapons.
You have an impressive new vessel, but I warn you, I have dealt with its kind before.
Whether it is personal cloaks or these cloak shipping technologies, there have been a long history of their use, but they were never that widespread. Trench's experience defending corporate space was invaluable, seeing all sorts of odd tactics and technologies from various star systems, and he's likely the only person on either side to have had history taking out cloaked ships.
Maybe he's tracking the magnetic signature.
The only way to test this theory was to let the missiles get a lock on them, and when the clone engineers confirmed that it was via magnetic signature, as the stealth ship turns towards them, the smaller craft was not as easy to hit with the heavy turbo lasers, and was so fast that within seconds it was barreling towards the bridge, and Trench knew his only hope was with the shielding.
Raise the shields!
We cannot. The shields are still recharging.
Made to slug it out in capital ship battles, the enemy ship wasn't supposed to be able to close the gap in between shield generation, something that proved fatal when faced against the brazen tactics of a smaller, faster craft. And once the Invincible was out of the fight, the blockade quickly became disorganized and the Republic was able to protect their allies on world. A year later, the CIS was going on a war crime spree, using smaller fleets anchored by a Providence to conduct hit-and-run attacks on Republic medical space stations throughout the galaxy. It might seem like an odd role for the powerful dreadnought, but morality aside, it was a creative use of its overwhelming power and speed, popping out of hyperspace, blasting right through whatever shielding it had, without much concern for smaller defense forces, and then slipping away through the blue void. Grievous would lead the assault on Kamino, but not from the invisible hand, though this unnamed Providence would take up the intended role as a command ship for the overall fleet, serving the same role during the Battle of Sullust, where Sidious ordered Dooku to execute his assassin. The CIS ships focused their fire on this Providence in an attempt to kill her. They're again seen using their overwhelming power to capture Even Peel, and later used to capture Adigalia by boarding her Venator, before blowing it apart with this same trio of ships tactic that we saw with the hit and runs on medical stations. This isn't confirmed, but perhaps smaller Providence-led fleets were launched to blitz any Republic assets caught lacking a sufficient fleet. Intel Sidious often linked to Dooku, so these ship trios were acting like special forces, assassin/kidnapping squads. When the Umbaran seceded and threw in with the CIS, an enormous fleet was rapidly deployed here to establish a blockade, which, though not perfect, the blockade greatly restricted the forces that were able to make it on-world, causing the Battle of Umbara to be one of the bloodiest for the Republic, with officers on the Providence coordinating the dozens of support craft that filled the skies. And though in the Battle of Dathomir we don't really see much of the orbital support, Dooku and Grievous weren't playing around when it came to ending the Night Sisters, sending a fleet with 4 Munificents, 2 Requisants, 2 supply ships, and a Providence, all to end a tribe of witches with no navy. When the CIS developed an encryption module that allowed them to crack Republic transmission codes, they placed it inside a powerful dreadnought with a full fleet of support, connecting the module to an excellent suite of sensors and hyperwave transmitters to try and track Republic movement all across the galaxy. The super tactical droid Ott-O was the commander of this fleet and had his prize tech stolen when D-Squad infiltrated the Providence. By 20 BBY, Grievous's well-honed blitz method got him the greatest win yet, destroying the flagship of his archenemy Kenobi when they swarmed his ship and forced the Jedi to set it to blow after being overwhelmed. A year later, we see 5 of them in defense of Ringovinda, and Dooku would arrive in his personal fleet to force Clovis's hand in a move that would end up pressuring the Republic to take control of the banks. When Skywalker's fleet arrives, Dooku fled and what could have been an epic but deadly space battle was avoided. In the final months of the war, it would act as the command ship for Grievous's assault on Maul's Shadow Collective, and then Trench's final battle over Anaxis. The Republic shipyards here were some of the most important in the galaxy, and after escaping death over Christophsis and surviving the Battle of Ringovinda, his new flagship, the Invulnerable, was leading the assault with 2 other Providence dreadnoughts, 7 Munificents, 2 Requisants, and 6 Omni support vessels. This assault would last for weeks, with Trench's secret weapon being the strategy algorithm designed by Rex and extracted by Echo, the clone who was thought long dead but had been reduced to a husk, a biological computer hooked up to a CIS system that would mine his mind for valuable Republic intel. When Echo was recovered, and Skywalker with Clone Force 99 were able to sneak onto the flagship, Trench was finally killed, and the Jedi used the Providence class's self-destruct feature to turn its sheer size and reactors against the fleet, igniting a chain reaction as debris from the Invulnerable barraged all the allies in its path. In what would prove to be the final days of the war, space battles were increasing along major hyperroutes, and reinforcements were sent to crush Plo Koon in the 442nd Siege Battalion's push to liberate Cato Neimoidia, which was followed by the single largest battle of the war, when over 1,000 CIS craft, led by Grievous upon the Invisible Hand, took this blitz tactic to another level. Just like how it worked to take out med stations and kidnap Jedi generals, scaled up, the principles were the same. The relatively untested Coruscant home defense fleet was quickly rendered useless, as Grievous barreled through the orbital defenses, down into the atmosphere, and captured the Supreme Chancellor. Getting him back into the invisible hand, the supposedly most powerful man in the galaxy was now in restraints, at the mercy of Grievous and Dooku. Just as Sidious planned, the Republic's Open Circle fleet, along with Kenobi and the Chosen One, would arrive just in time to cut off the CIS escape. After navigating through clouds of droid fighters, they were able to deactivate the deflector shields that protected the hangar, and make their way through the ship. Dooku didn't realize that his beheading was also right in line with the plan, but the broadside volley from the Venator Gwalara shook things up, blasting through the massive dreadnought and setting off proton bombs to create a chain reaction that caused the repulsor fields and power systems to fail, sending the ship into a nosedive as it was no longer countering the gravitational effects of Coruscant. And you can see a glimmer of the shielding struggling to keep up. As it plummeted, loose ships and massive MTTs were launched across the hangar, but reversing the stabilizers and Grievous's quick call,
"Fire the emergency booster engines!"
did help to level out the ship, and he used the in-ship security features like ray shields and droidicas to help capture these Republic VIPs. While the fight in the command bridge resulted in Grievous's escape through the window, forcing an emergency viewport wall to engage to seal the room, and the cyborg would get away by launching all of the escape pods at once, in order to minimize his odds of being shot down or captured. But as the invisible hand kept barreling through the atmosphere, more systems were failing, and the entire aft section rips away, leaving only that original central tube that the rest of the Providence tubes are built around. This main section is expertly set down by the galaxy's best pilot for what only could be described as
another happy landing.
While Coruscant celebrated the heroic rescue of their beloved leader, roughly 250,000 people were killed by the falling debris of the invisible hand, mostly this main back section, which could have easily taken out several skyscrapers. And symbolic of the charade of war, once the dust cleared, the Emperor was on his throne, and Republic and CIS craft all went to the same grave, on the junkyard world of Bracca. Enormous efforts went into dismantling all sorts of ships, and this is a breeding ground for corruption and black market opportunities. The Invincible and Lucid Voice ended up here, and with some clever and covert movements, Birch Teller's rebel group were able to Frankenstein themselves a smaller but still powerful version of a Providence. This was long before the Unified Rebel Alliance, and this group was light years ahead of other resistance fighters who were using an odd laser cannon or have a good slicer in their midst. This Teller Providence was 920 meters long and had 12 turbolasers, 10 point defense ion cannons, and 6 proton torpedo launchers. Perhaps even if they could have stolen more than this, they likely wanted to keep it as streamlined as possible, so that they actually had enough fuel and munitions to use it. Pure efficiency, it must have been the most powerful rebel craft sailing the stars at this time, 14 BBY. Throw in that the Empire wasn't expecting anything like this, and you can see why they were able to get away with Grievous's old strategy for some time before it came to the attention of Tarkin. Because outside of that firepower, their comms and sensor jamming suites were still functional, and used to cut off communications for backup, stop the spread of propaganda, and slice into hollow-wave transmitters to broadcast the true events of Imperial war crimes, stuff the news would never cover. While other times their armament was used to just blow up the hyperwave transmitters, there must have been countless rebels that would have been indirectly saved by these efforts, without even knowing who Birch Teller was or what his gang was up to, just thanking the force that stormtrooper backup never showed, or some TIE fighter patrol peeled off to deal with this mysterious communications failure. But with the attack on Sentinel Base, the secret Death Star construction facility that Tarkin was in charge of, he would get to figuring out who this enemy was, and knew that some of the IDs from the Clone Wars era must have still been in these Frankenstein parts.
Analysis of data received by the Command Center's friend or foe indicator confirms that the capital ship is a downsized version of a Separatist Providence-class cruiser carrier, modified with modules taken from CIS frigates and destroyers, which the SEPs, usually mounted aft rather than forward, appear to have come from the cruiser Lucid Voice.
And as you might expect, Tarkin made sure that they would pay, and this respectable foe was added to Tarkin's long list of vanquished enemies, with the ship being destroyed in 14 BBY at the Gulf of Tatooine. Though there was at least one more Providence, this being the dedicated carrier variant that came into the naval forces of the Alliance to restore the Republic, the now unified Rebel Force, and it was painted with their bold red color. So that's it for the breakdown. As for behind the scenes facts, this original cross-section is actually a source of a lot of canon material, like having the first mention of the Lucid Voice, as well as a ton of other details on how the ship works. The design was inspired by Zeppelins, and this sound was meant to reference the unique Zeppelin sound. Some depictions in video games put the bridge all over the place, from being in the center to the top of the spire, and this is one of the few ships or vehicles that had their stats dramatically changed from Legends to canon, almost double the speed, but my points earlier about it being surprisingly fast still stand, and even in Legends it was still faster than the Venator. And if you want to look into it more, a lot of these details come from these books. But most important of all, Remember, the Force has a love of irony, so make sure your ship has a humble name, and the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, MetaNerds? This breakdown will have us looking under the Durasteel armor to see how this ship works, learn its history and its ties to shipwright royalty, and how the V-Wing left its mark on the galaxy, pulling from all these resources, and closing with some behind-the-scenes facts. The Alpha 3 Nimbus-class V-Wing starfighter was personally designed by Wallace Blissix, the man that gave us the Gladiator and Victory-class Star Destroyers, and who trained his daughter Lyra to help him model things out. He would become one of the early founders of the Alliance to restore the Republic, while his daughter would continue working for Kuat Drive Yards, and go on to design the Imperial class. It was Blissix's genius that went into the Alpha 3, manufactured by the starfighter subsidiary Kuat Systems Engineering, which would also produce the Delta 7, Eta 2, and later A-Wing, with the V-Wing going into production later in the Clone Wars. But due to a more streamlined mass production technique that was perfected by the stresses of the overwhelming swarms of CIS fighters, this battle-hardened Kuat was able to pump out V-Wings at such a rate that within a few months, the V-19 turret would be all but completely replaced as Clone Wars pilots preferred this more compact fighter. Each would cost about $15,000 less than the V-19, at $120K, and had a much smaller profile at 7.9 meters long and 3.8 meters wide. While even with the wings extended, it was just 5.84 meters tall. The pilot didn't have to worry about these giant wings of the turret. If you look at the cubic space the V-19 occupies, 1,404 cubic meters, the V-Wing is only about 12% of that, at 175 cubic meters. If you wanted an Eta 2 with a shield, it would set you back nearly 3 times the credits. While there was a version of that with concussion missiles, that was a really rare modification, and there was a mod that packed a single concussion missile into the nose of the V-Wing, and the extremely rare flak gun and proton bomb variants. When you throw in that the Eta was built with Jedi powers in mind, getting away with not having to put a ton of features in there since the pilot could just use the Force. That's why the standard Eta has no shield, but the V-Wing does have shielding, equal firepower, and was only 50 km per hour slower, at 1,450 km per hour. But it has the same acceleration at 5,200 G, and a 75 megalight rating, a stat used for how fast it goes in the vacuum of space. Both of these craft would require the use of the Sillier 45 hyperdrive module, which itself was rated at a Class 1. And while their laser cannons are the same strength, the Alpha 3 had a much faster rate of fire, being a pair of dual rapid-fire laser cannons. There is an astromech located right behind the cockpit, which instead of an R series was actually a Q7 series astromech. It had a pretty standard 10-jump memory, but was unique in that this dome is mirrored on the bottom, having no legs or treads. It just hovered around via repulsor tech, making it easier to navigate on any terrain, especially getting up and into the fighter. But it also broke down at an annoying rate, proving why the R-series design has remained the same for thousands of years. Keep your fancy floating droids for the tech shows. But since the wings folded down to act as their own landing gear, this meant they didn't need any infrastructure at all. Nothing to grab the ship or to drop in the astromech. Which is just one of the reasons why there were so many factions later on in its history that wanted to get their hands on this ship. It may not look like it, but in a way this is an early TIE fighter. It has 2 ion engines, or a twin ion engine system, with vertical wings that act as heat radiator panels. We even get a glimpse at this mesh pattern that would become iconic to the TIE. While there are also these large deflector shield heat sinks, which are required for powering a shield on such a small craft, while the actual power lines to these shields and the projectors themselves were packed into the nose. Fuel tanks lined each side of the body, and the laser cannons swivel on these wing hubs to give about a 90-degree firing arc. The ship lacks any life support systems, so the pilots had flight suits and helmets that were actually fully sealed. And not just in case of emergency like we see with the ARC-170 pilots, but covering the face like a full helmet. Though we do see this picked up by ARC pilots as well towards the end of the war. There was a very limited run on a sub-model called the Alpha 3B, or Besh, for the letter B in Arabesh, and there aren't much stats on this, but it is one of those variants that packed a projectile launcher. Being incredibly agile, the V-Wing was the first main clone-piloted ship that was able to outmaneuver the droid Tri-Fighter, and learning from their enemy, the Republic started releasing these in swarms, not using a hyperdrive ring for each ship, but packing a ton of them into a Venator, and releasing these Nimbus clouds with such speed that the unshielded Separatist starfighters were easily blown apart. The rapid-fire cannon, small profile, and speed were a great counter to the Vultures, Hyenas, and Tri-Fighters. But for larger targets, they would have to act as escorts for the ARC-170s and Y-Wings. During the Battle of Coruscant, some of them did make it all the way to the Invisible Hand, but they also suffered their highest percentage of casualties during this final battle of the war. They were also the preferred escort fighter for VIPs, all the way up to the new Emperor himself, ensuring Palpatine and Vader's safe travel from Mustafar to the Sith medical station on Coruscant. Same goes for valuable cargo and top-secret locations, being the bane of Bad Batch as V-Wings were guarding the mysterious Imperial base on Daro, where they were able to damage and even take down the Marauders' powerful shielding, only for the auxiliary power of Gonki plugging in to save the day. And later they were used as the main security detail at Castle Sereno, as the Emperor was ordering the ransacking of Count Dooku's old treasure haul. These Imperial variants have the drab gray coloring. They lose the astromech, which means that they had no plans on sending these through hyperspace. And now the pilots are wearing a TK Stormtrooper version of the clone pilot helmet, still in that full face covering style, which is true for all the Imperial TIE Fighter line as well, since these all lacked the life support systems that were more common in the Republic era. And in this time of transition to the TIE LN, these later iterations of the V-Wing use TIE Fighter engines, with a simple change that allows it to fit into this frame. The latest we see them in legal use is circa 14 BBY, under the command of Wilf Tarkin during the Birch Teller campaign, fighting against this early rebel faction, which was using salvaged and repurposed CIS droid fighters. So 5 years after the Battle of Coruscant, these battles would have looked a lot like something out of the Clone Wars. And while officially sent to the scrapyards in the years after this, many of them fell into the hands of private security forces and cartels. From the Hutts to the Zan Consortium, Mandalorian factions, and even outliving the Empire itself to be used by various remnant forces, now fighting against the New Republic. And the latest known use is around 30 years after the Battle of Endor, being used by Janata Security, who scooped up tons of the greatest ships from the past, modifying everything from the Nebulon B to ARC-170s and N-1 starfighters. So that's it for its breakdown, and as for behind the scenes facts, originally the end scene of Imperialized Venators was to have TIE fighters screeching by, but Lucas said that the Empire would have 19 years to build them, they didn't have to show this change immediately on screen, and it was fine to just have this transition with Republic craft, but just painted gray to show this turn to Empire. To keep the reference to TIE fighters, they do have a similar sound. And that's where you get the lore expanding on this with the detail that the TIE engine could be placed in a V-Wing. In the original Battlefront series, there's a version that acted like a heavy bomber, but this is really just for game mechanics and doesn't make much sense lore-wise. While in the MMO Star Wars Galaxies, the ship became a status symbol, as you could only get it through a loot card in the Squadrons over Corellia trading card pack, and their extensive use by pirates is seen in the Empire at War series. While the LEGO version of this ship has a Q7 astromech, but it goes against the unique lore of this droid and has it looking like another R series. So that's it for the Alpha 3 Nimbus class V-Wing starfighter. Please hit that like button, leave a comment, and share the video. Those are all the best ways to help me out. Subscribe if you want to see more, and check out the membership. But most important of all, remember, great ship design is a highly heritable trait, and the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, MetaNerds? We'll be pulling from every source available to break down the Lancer-class frigate, the ship that could have saved the Empire, but just ended up proving how inept they were. The Lancer-class frigate, manufactured by the renowned Kuat Drive Yards, is an exemplary model of starship design, tailored specifically for anti-starfighter warfare. With a cost of 4,760,000 credits, it's a significant investment, equal to much larger ships, but you'll see how its capabilities and features justify the expense. Measuring 250 meters in length, 57 meters in width, and 60 meters in height, it's a sizable vessel designed to operate as a part of larger fleets or as an independent platform for starfighter defense. Its size allows it to accommodate a considerable amount of tech, weaponry, and crew, giving it a formidable presence in any engagement. Its propulsion system allows for a maximum acceleration of 4 megalight per second, reaching a top speed of around 20 megalight. While this speed may not compare to the swifter T-65 X-Wing or TIE fighters, which can reach 100 megalight per hour, the Lancer is not primarily designed for speed. Its role is more focused on providing anti-starfighter support and is meant to stay with the larger and slower capital ships. And if you're wondering how top speed in space makes any sense, don't think about it too much. Just chalk it up to resistance from colliding into midichlorians, floating their way through space on their way to the next hero to provide plot armor. It's equipped with a hyperdrive, and some models have a Class 1, while others are fitted with a Class 2, along with a backup Class 15. This variation allows for flexibility in deployment, having fleets that are all in the same class of hyperdrive, that way they can more quickly respond to emerging threats, pairing Class 1s with other larger Class 1 capital ships. Its shielding is rated at 576 SBD, or shield barrier density, providing robust protection against enemy fire. Its hull is equally sturdy, rated at 304 RUs, or resistance units, ensuring the vessel can withstand significant damage even after that shield goes down. It comes with a standard navigation computer, essential for precise calculations required for hyperspace jumps and in-system maneuvers. But its most notable feature is its armament. 20 point defense AG-2G quad laser cannons. That's 80 individual point defense cannons in total, and they're all strategically distributed across the hull. 5 quads each at the 4 port, starboard, and aft sections. Some of these cannons are capable of retracting into the main hull and reducing the frigate's profile in combat or when traveling. Point defense cannons are crucial for defending against starfighter assaults and incoming missiles, making the Lancer class an essential asset in protecting larger capital ships and convoys. The Lancer also houses a complement of 2 shuttles, enhancing its operational flexibility, whether for deploying troops, conducting reconnaissance missions, or shuttling cargo and VIPs. The crew requirements were substantial, with a standard crew of 810, including 40 gunners. However, the ship can operate with a minimum crew of 375, demonstrating the efficiencies of its systems and that it relies on some automation, something you'd think you'd see a lot more of in the galaxy far, far away. Additionally, it carries 40 troops as passengers, which does allow it to carry out its own very limited scope of operations. Though I can't stress this enough, and you'll see that the imps seem to forget this too, it was designed to be embedded in larger fleets. The cargo capacity of 300 metric tons, a weight equal to 368 dewbacks, we get the funny stat that it provides consumables lasting from 1 week to 6 months. I guess that just depends on their discipline, as that's a 24x difference. But if we assume 6 months of Jawa jerky supplies, you can see that it's well equipped for extended deployments, capable of sustaining its crew in operations for considerable periods without resupply. And if the larger fleet that it was escorting was out for longer than this, then it could use those shuttles to ferry supplies from the larger ships like ISDs. With that focus on point defense, removing the threat of starfighters, it played one of the most vital roles in fleet compositions. The combo of firepower, respectable shields, and operational flexibility made it a valuable asset in any galactic conflict, proving again why Kuat has been king since the time of the Old Republic, producing high-quality, specialized starships for diverse needs. The surest pick for your stock portfolio, and the only ones that ever win these galactic wars. But taking a look at this schematic, we can look at the bow to see the dual decks, with the top one being the computer and sensor control bridge, while the main bridge with pilots, gunners, and the ship's commanders is located below. Right behind the bridge, we see the main deflector shield projector, a smart location for maximal strength around your nerve center, and even your docking port, which is located right above. This is a really unique spot to put a port. It might look normal-ish for many ships, but could be a very odd sight with others, having a ship sticking right out of its head, as it were. While the internal hangar bay is down below. And here you can see the retracted cannon, and moving over the dorsal side we hit the sensors, with these larger dishes mirrored on the top and bottom being the targeting computer array. This device is not described, perhaps it's some top secret Kuat creation, but it's not in all models, and thus could be a part of those with the much faster Class 1 hyperdrive system, either in the unit itself or a radiator to shed heat. Or it could just be another form of sensor array, making sure they get the max use out of their anti-starfighter weaponry, with tracking multiple nimble fighters requiring a lot more data and calculation than just heavy turbolaser cannons on capital ships slugging it out. Now these large bulbous ovals are not shield projectors, but power storage capacitor bays, showing the enormous energy generated for all those weapons, respectable hyperdrive, and this massive quad assembly of ion thrusters. With this unit here being the overload chamber to help control and vent any dangerous fluctuations, especially when the system was under attack. With these energy storing systems being hit by ion weaponry and the downstream effects of this damage, while still trying to generate energy and return fire, navigate through the space battle and dense asteroid fields or debris clouds. The earliest iteration of the Lancer class was first deployed a few months after the conclusion of the Clone Wars. During this period, Imperial starship strategy predominantly focused on ship-to-ship combat, hunting down CIS warlord holdovers that might have an odd requisite or munificent, but since Vader shut things down on Mustafar, the threat of droid fighters was essentially removed, and they weren't worried about the threat posed by smaller, more agile starfighters, just making sure they took out these old capital ships. This oversight became particularly evident as the Rebel Alliance pilots began exploiting the weakness of larger star destroyers, a phenomenon colloquially referred to as trench run disease.
It's risky, but flying fast and close to the Star Destroyer's hull should get us to the other side safely. Hold. Now, fire all boost thrusters.
This is one of the most useful tactics in the Rebels' strategy, flipping the Tarkin doctrine on its head, not being afraid of the much larger ships, but using their bulk against them. Pilots executing the TRD would fly close to the surface of a large ship, using its hull trenches to shield themselves from enemy fire. These trenches, designed for structural purposes rather than combat, provided unintended cover for the nimble fighters. By hugging the ship's surface, very few guns could actually fire at them, and those that could were all heavy turbolaser cannons, which were primarily designed for ship-to-ship combat. Big, massive bolts, but would never be accurate enough or fire fast enough to hit these fast-moving targets like snub fighters. The effectiveness of this approach was enhanced when starfighters were armed with heavy ordnance like proton torpedoes and concussion missiles. They could perform surgical strikes, hitting a key area, and maybe if it didn't take out the entire ship, it at least immobilized it and took it out of the fight for months, if not longer, while the rebels carried on with their main objective. Of course, the most successful application of the TRD was during the Battle of Yavin, and the Imperial Navy's response involved two key strategies: the acceleration of production and deployment of the TIE Interceptor, which was faster and more agile than its predecessors, and the development of the Lancer-class frigate. It was specifically designed as an escort ship to counter screens of starfighters, with hopes of shutting down this TRD tactic. Though the fast-moving rebel opportunists did find ways to still use it, most notably in the assault on the Fondor shipyards.
Stay toward the middle of those structures and keep low. Most of their guns can't hit you there.
And of course again during the Battle of Endor. By targeting sites that were under construction, or the enormous Executor-class ships, they still applied the TRD to deadly effect. Commander Wedge Antilles, reflecting on the first Battle of Borleas, noted that while the actual success rate of snub fighters destroying an ISD was relatively low, the psychological impact of the Death Star's destruction had instilled a deep-seated fear of this tactic among the Imperial commanders. Rogue Squadron got so good at this tactic that they were able to maneuver around the defenses of the Lasankia, a super star destroyer, using their advanced targeting systems to guide heavy salvos of torpedoes and missiles into the enemy ship. This tactic usually involved a triangular three-ship formation, with the two rear fighters protecting the lead fighter, which was the one equipped with the most potent weaponry. This formation allowed the lead fighter to focus on targeting, while the others provided cover by absorbing incoming fire, and hopefully firing back and taking out the enemy. It was Admiral Andres that proposed the use of Lancer-class frigates to counter enemy fighters, showing that it was the missing piece that would allow the more dominant Star Destroyers to focus on larger ship-to-ship engagements. And while the Imperial Navy Command approved this strategy, it was often considered to be the most effective creation of the Imperial military. Still, they were literally overshadowed by the grand projects like Super Star Destroyers and exotic planet killers. If you thought the Imps couldn't get any dumber, of course, the Lancer-class design sacrificed capital-grade weaponry and shielding. It was supposed to be embedded in a fleet, but this meant that it was vulnerable to other capital ships. Again, their slow speed was because they were escorting the ISDs, capital ships that could be packed full of TIE interceptors, and so without them, there was no way to pursue the faster starfighters. When the Empire sent the Lancer class out on its own, the rebel pilots could just avoid it. With high construction cost and substantial crew requirements, the Imperial Starfleet deemed the Lancer class too expensive for widespread fleet integration. And so many of the ones that were produced were relegated to roles in planetary defense, rearguard operations, and anti-piracy patrols, particularly in the Outer Rim territories. You could imagine how this would have driven Grand Admiral Thrawn insane. As petty moffs and regional bureaucrats were sending Lancer-class frigates on wild goose chases hunting down local pirates, putting them on offense, and while those used on defense to guard operations like spaceports or some planet-side bases could be easily taken out by the growing number of capital ships in the Rebel Alliance. As Alderaan made sure that ships kept being stolen by rebels, with amazing Corellian designs falling into their hands, not to mention all the Mon Cala capital ships. All the rebels had to do was locate a Lancer, either through local intel or even having starfighters just observe them at a distance, being smart enough not to engage, just report back to one of their capital ships, who could pop out of hyperspace right on top of the thing, harmlessly absorb all the point defense laser cannon fire, as there was absolutely no risk of point defense cannons overwhelming something like Mon Cala capital ship shield generators, and so in a few salvos the Lancer was blown into space debris. The strategic value of Lancer-class frigates was not fully realized until the rise of Grand Admiral Thrawn in 980Y. Even then, he used them in a unique way, knowing how to push them into a more offensive role, leading quick, raiding missions against key New Republic worlds, but only because he knew that the New Republic was using starfighter-based defenses. So it was like the reverse of what the rebels were successfully doing to the Empire. If you knew that a cloud of X-Wings was all that was protecting some outpost, now the Lancer could be the one to pop out of hyperspace right on top of them, blow the X-Wings to bits, or scare them off while the shuttles go down and carry out the objective. while being smart enough to quickly retreat through hyperspace before the New Republic capital ships could respond. As the Empire waned and the New Republic gained ascendancy, defeating the remaining Imperial warlords, several of the Lancers fell into the hands of the New Republic Defense Fleet and were integrated into planetary defense fleets, though most were set to be decommissioned. Even then, it did influence the development of the New Republic's Ranger-class gunship, making sure they had a ship specialized for an anti-starfighter role. One of the most notable uses during this era was in Morith Duel's defense of Kessel, utilizing 2 Lancer-class frigates, and during the Yuzon Vong War, the NR recommissioned many of their Lancers, finding these anti-starfighter capabilities invaluable against the Yuzon Vong's Coral skippers. As you can see throughout its long service history, it really evolves from an underutilized asset to a key component at various times when used correctly under leaders from the Imperial era, Imperial Remnant, and New Republic forces. And approximately 3 decades after the Battle of Endor, it found new life and purpose within the First Order. In this period of Cold War, as Leia was monitoring the rise of something in the unknown regions, Commander Poe Dameron made a significant discovery of 2 Lancer-class frigates being under the control of this mysterious new military force. Rising from the ashes of the Galactic Empire, they leveraged existing military assets, and hoping not to repeat the failures over Yavin and Endor, they wanted to make sure they had anti-starfighter capabilities. And when Poe discovered these, it was not just a frightening revelation for the Resistance as a whole, but very personal for him as a fighter pilot. Though of course those midichlorians did find their heroes and adorn them in the proper plot armor, making sure to negate the effect of these Lancers. As for behind the scenes facts, there are a lot of design similarities with the Carrack and Dreadnought, but all 3 of these ships come from different manufacturers, so this might point at some degree of corporate espionage or just flat out imitation. The Lancer, produced by Kuat Drive Yards, for the anti-starfighter role, were the Carrack-class light cruiser, designed by Demorian Manufacturing Corporation, and the Dreadnought-class heavy cruiser from Rendili Star Drive play a more standard capital ship role. It would be a very silly-looking fleet, but really these 3 would be paired excellently, each having unique roles and characteristics. We get the story of Poe finding them in the 2015 novel Before the Awakening, written by Greg Rucka, and this is how it comes back into the new canon. All the more detailed original canon or Legends history was first mentioned in the Star Wars Rules Companion and made its first appearance in the novel Dark Force Rising. The schematics and technical details fleshed out in the Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels, as well as the Age of Rebellion core rulebook. You can also check out Starships of the Galaxy and the Imperial sourcebook to learn more. Make sure you head over to Fractal Sponge. It's where you get a lot of these magnificent renders. I'm sure a lot of you guys have already been there, but I had to make sure to mention it. There's truly a ton of amazing things on there. If you made it this far, please hit that like button and check out these videos. I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, no ship's stat is stronger than the plot, and the Force will be with you, always. What's up, MetaNerdz? For this complete breakdown, we'll be comparing the Marauder to Clone Wars and Imperial vessels, taking a tour of its interior and looking at its strengths and weaknesses. Let's start with its manufacturer, Cygnus Spaceworks, who made most of the military shuttles of this era, from the Nu, Theta, Sentinel, Eta, Alpha, and later Lambda. And the company even played a part in the stealth craft turned flagship for Tarkin, the Carrion Spike. The design includes cues from the Nu class body, with a wing style closer to the Theta and Eta. And although there are no official stats for the Omicron, we can deduce a lot by looking at these ship siblings. In this battle, it appears to be about 1.5 times the Nu, so around 30 meters long, and a height from the lower wing to the tip being around 37.5 meters, which would make it second only to the Sentinel class in size, and you could stack a couple ATTEs up next to it when it was docked. One of the first modifications of this shuttle is the speed. Stock, I would put it around 1,000 kilometers per hour, since most of these are around 850. Meaning it would match the Sentinel, while there are things like the Theta used by Palpatine that hit 2,000 kilometers per hour. So as ridiculous as it sounds, the Marauder might be quicker than a TIE fighter, and we get a glimpse of this when it separates from the Invulnerable. Just look at how agile it is at flipping over and racing away. So I think around 1,500 kilometers per hour in this heavily modified version. And speaking of TIEs, this is the only shuttle like it that works in heat radiating panels into these massive wings like the TIE line of fighters. They probably went so large with these wings because of that souped up ion engine, because when you throw that in with the weapons and shields, in a shuttle of this size, the power generator in this thing must have had it running extremely hot. The ship is classified as an assault shuttle and packs 2 front laser cannons and a powerful aft laser turret, which is perfect for their usual mission objectives, which hoped for a more stealth approach while being capable of blasting their way out. Like the ARC-170 and Ghost, having a dedicated gunner that can clear away tailing enemy craft is such a useful force multiplier, that even though it's just a normal strength cannon, this placement and ability to hop in and take control makes it so much harder to pursue or shoot it down. The Omicron class was rare, but not so obscure that nobody ever heard of it.
Looks like a modified Omicron class attack shuttle.
This clone does work the impound, so he probably has a higher knowledge of ships than most, but that means it isn't some one-off custom ship designed for this top-secret military unit. Clone Force 99 is such a secret that even Rex, one of the most prominent clones and the second-in-command to General Skywalker, who was himself the most beloved general of the war, even Rex doesn't know much about them.
So why haven't I heard of this squad? Experimental Unit Clone Force 99. The defective clones with, desirable mutations. 99, eh? Nice touch.
This nice touch was the homage to their fallen brother 99, who died in the heroic defense of their homeworld Camino. A man seen by his own creators as a useless failure and perversion of their genetic program, but was seen as a beloved brother by all clones who heard the story of 99.
I know you work with Cody sometimes, but who do you guys report to? Good question. Can't say I've got an answer.
So while we're surprised that Rex is out of the loop on anything, this is a nice look at the structure of the Grand Army of the Republic, as Cody is higher ranking, a CC or clone commander, with a specialized genome and training program from birth for his role as commander, while Rex is just a CT, or clone trooper. And it's just a testament to his incredible willpower and uniqueness that allowed him to fit right in and be respected and often deferred to by force-wielding Jedi generals and enhanced CCs. When the ship lands, we see that signature Cygnus wing folding, and the landing gear that extends is standard, with running fog lights that we can see are always on but can be increased to act like headlights, like that main one towards the front. These experimental clones have no respect for the Reg's flight control or landing protocols, screaming into forward and axis and scattering crates everywhere. And later you get a good look at the footprint of this massive craft on an Axis base. We see that it can be piloted by one person, and that these control panels were used for navigation to slice up space into grids, and were mirrored for the co-pilot. While the rest of the panels can display everything from local space orbits to holoweb surfing, with its powerful long-range hyperwave transceiver that could reach out across the entire galaxy with this faster-than-light means of communication. The gonk on board was from his own bad batch of droids.
I'm fixing it.
You can't. He's a defective unit.
Hunter.
Don't worry, we're defective too.
Gonki here provides additional power, and by having it not always plugged into the ship, you could hit the Marauder with an ion attack that disables everything, but then still run things off of this portable generator, or plug it into the ship after this attack to get some systems back online. We see it used to power up shields and get engine systems back up after being peppered by V-Wings. But since it was now plugged into the ship, when the Marauder gets hit some more, those balls of plasma are dispersed across the shield, and that electricity does start to transfer to the ship itself, and everything connected to it. Shocking Gonki just like we see with other droids like Chopper. But when not in the heat of battle, it can be used as a table for board games, a second hand to hold your tools, and most important of all, it turns the ship into a gym, being a full-body workout device. The main body of this ship has these crash harnesses, and shelves and storage spaces that Wrecker would use like a bed, with more storage and perhaps the beds for the rest of the Bad Batch up top, which all sounded like a dream to a young Harrison Dula.
You get to live on a starship? That's my dream.
When the boys decided that Omega would become the newest member of the Bad Batch, they turned the turret into her room, with the latter making it feel like a big bunk bed or even treehouse vibes, which shows these guys were new parents, because she had her own separate escape door, with this hatch that opens up below the turret, something that did prove useful in escaping from the Zygerians. The interior is filled with all sorts of artwork, from Republic military victory propaganda posters to pinups, and a bunch of ads for blasters straight out of the Blaster and Tabana magazine, and even a relatable I Want to Believe poster. Like all starships, the fine controls for space travel can be used to hover in place, which when combined with these winches, they can drop down into deep caverns, as the cables seem to go on for at least several hundred feet. And you could imagine this being used to lift up or move around cargo, and even lighter vehicles like speeder bikes. It also provides a stealthy way to deploy or rapidly evac if they use something like the Skyhook technology. We see the Marauder going to all sorts of hostile locations, from dangerous environments to deadly locals. Side note, comment what you think of this.
My intel says the Poltecs worship flying reptiles.
These Poltec dragons look a lot like the form the Brother takes, and I think it might point to an idea that's explored in some of the expanded universe, that some populations' religious ideas evolved from the sighting of these powerful force-wielding family members, the father, brother, and sister. As the Darksider was going to and fro across the galaxy, Their Poltec ancestors saw this dragon creature do something incredible, and that memory was forever enshrined in their religion. Comment down below what you think of that. But back to the ship, Tech has an excellent idea of hitting the chain code problem head on. When he learns that the Empire is using a blockchain sort of technology to track all people and objects across the galaxy, instead of trying to evade this, he gets in early by registering it with fake details. But those details are now enshrined in the blockchain from then on out and would appear legitimate. A great idea, even if this method of letting the imps impound them was a bit too risky for Hunter, and their escape did result in the barrage of fire that resulted in a lucky bolt hitting a capacitor.
One of our capacitors sustained damage during our firefight with the Wraiths.
When they work on repairing it, they have to contend with Ordo moondragons, which lived off of raw energy, and would consume power systems and ships like the Pilot's Bane, the Minox, that were hated throughout the stars for their similar appetite. Many crucial systems are right behind these panels, making everything easier to reach and repair.
The signature key should be embedded below the rear parallax inverters.
Just tell me what to rip out.
And since Tech was the one who knew the ship inside and out, he felt like he was closer to her than any others.
Wrecker, easy with my ship.
Your ship?
And his expertise is able to scramble their signature. They know that credits can make sure you aren't even scanned as long as you avoid major Imperial ports or automated scanners at more heavily trafficked locations. But by making use of criminal elements, you also expose yourself to bounty hunters. And when trying to run from the Empire and the likes of Cad Bane, their luck was sure to run out eventually. Over all these different missions, we see how scratched up and tarnished the exterior of the ship is getting, with this patina forming on some material, a corrosion of a copper alloy that is making it have these patches of blue-green. There are 14 different types of popular copper alloys in a galaxy far, far away, used in everything from ship armor to jewelry and statues. So it'd be interesting if this is pointing to a rarer alloy used for some superior stealth or heat dispersing capacity. That's it for its breakdown. Can't wait to see more of it in action in Season 2. But as for behind the scenes facts, we've actually seen this ship since 2014, when the unfinished Clone Wars episodes were revealed. And this part was cut, perhaps deemed too racy, as it's one of the most obvious changes from what we eventually got in Clone Wars Season 7.
Yeah, she can negotiate with me anytime.
Back then, the ship was called the Havoc Marauder, and the name was meant to just be dropped to Marauder, but the Havoc part was slapped back on for the booklet Ships of the Republic and Separatists too. Since there's no official stats on this book, I would point you to these resources, which are in the description, if you want to read up more on ships in general. Hit the like button, comment, and share. All that stuff helps out with the algorithm. Make suggestions for future videos, subscribe, and check out the membership if you want to see more. But most important of all, remember, there's never a time when you don't need a gonk droid. And the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, MetaNerdz? This breakdown of the Kandosi type dreadnought will take us back to the Old Republic era, a time when the Mandalorian fleets were at their peak strength, seeing its complement, armament, and a ton more, as well as how its legacy would affect the galaxy for thousands of years. It was created by various Mandalorian manufacturers, but would not have included the famed Mandel motors, since that most famous manufacturer was not even a millennia old by the time of the Battle of Yavin. Sounds funny to consider them a young company, but for reference, Rendili Hyperworks and Kuat Drive Yards were making major warships for the Republic for at least 4,000 years. And its manufacturer isn't some Mandalorian secret, but even they lost all accounts of this due to their fracturing from the Mandalorian Wars on. From 3,976 BBY, up to what we see in the post-Imperial era with Bo-Katan and Din Djarin. These people would lose a lot of their history to infighting, which in a twisted way shows just how important other aspects were to their culture, since the history and traditions that do survive had to survive countless forces pulling them apart. And yet things like their armor, Great Dragon symbolism, and Mandoa language were cherished enough to remember and keep alive. Which really says something, because what we do know of the manufacturer is that though they forgot which of the Mando companies produced the Kandosi, they proudly remember that they stole this tech from the Fenalar species. A history that includes their extermination by the Mandalorian Crusaders around 6,700 BBY. The Fenalar were a highly advanced people that produced great dreadnoughts and armor. This armor was made of frick, which was a lightsaber and blaster-resistant rare material, in a class shared only with Cortosis and Beskar. They weren't claiming to be the geniuses that designed it, but were proud that they conquered these people, seizing their warships and Jedi-stopping armor, before exterminating them and incorporating these designs the nerd species developed into their more powerful and thus divinely supported civilization. Their war god smiled as fittingly this line of Mando-produced dreadnoughts based off this conquered tech would be named the Kandosi, meaning indomitable or ruthless in the Mandawade language. It is unclear how much of this design was uniquely developed by the Mando engineers over the years, but the dreadnought that would introduce itself to the Old Republic and Sith factions was this model, which cost 200 million credits. And since inflation seems non-existent in the galaxy far, far away, you can compare that cost with later ships like the Imperial and Venator Star Destroyers, showing something similar to the Kaldabe, the effects of economy at scale seen in Kuat drive yards being able to produce something cheaper and in most ways better. At a length of 1,360 meters, or about 0.85 miles, it was right in between a Venator and Imperial, and more than 4 times the Old Republic Hammerhead. The height is about 680 meters, or 0.42 miles, making it about 2 Zillo beasts taller than an ISD, while at a width of 397 meters, or a quarter mile, it was more than twice the Hammerhead, while being thinner than both Kuat craft. With its Class 2 hyperdrive rating, it was on par with most capital ships across all eras, with the faster Class 1 being an exception, and it did have a backup Class 9. In the Kaldabe, we saw a rare shield leeching technology, and the Mandos sure do like to keep their shields interesting, with this dreadnought having double layered deflector shields. As good as that sounds, there must be a reason we don't see this tech even in Mon Calamari designs, which are usually considered to have the best shielding devices out there. It reminds me more of the cheaper, improvised type of armor you might find, like when real-world troops add sandbags or cages to stop penetration from explosive devices. No other manufacturer would use this double shield method, they would just make the shield stronger, and there would be the issue of shield projectors feeding into each other, so to make this work there was likely 2 different systems. Don't get me wrong, I think it's genius and a simple, practical solution, since 2 different types of shield projectors meant that you could hope that outer layer could be replaced before the final layer was defeated. But just like how no manufacturer is sending out troop carriers with sandbags and body armor stacked on top, that's something the troops developed from their battlefield experience, I think the Mandalorians improvised this double shield from their non-stop campaigns throughout the galaxy, and saw that it did actually work. The whole plating comes from a rare source, the company Biblos drive yards, which of all things would be most known for the G-1A starfighter used by Zuckuss. This company was great for developing cloaking technology, but not at the capital ship scale. Its armament consisted of 5 heavy turbolaser batteries, 4 point defense medium ion cannons, and 2 triple laser point defense laser cannons, with a pair of super heavy concussion missile batteries, and a total of 120 missiles on board, as well as 2 tractor beam batteries. When compared to the Clone Wars era on, the Kandosi is a bit light, but it really isn't too far behind, especially considering that they went all in on the missiles, having about twice that of the Venator, while the ISD had none. The Imperial craft focused on cannons and tractor beams, better for capturing sneaky rebel ships, but the ancient Mandawade were willing to completely destroy anything in their path, knowing that if they did wish to take an enemy alive, they could send out their complement of 128 Devab-type starfighters to neutralize the engines and guns of an enemy ship, and send over boarding crews via the 8 Shadlar-type trooper ships, while the number of Basilisk war droids was described simply as numerous. The Devab was your standard fighter, but the Shadlar was this horrifying spider that could dig on or crawl across your space station or capital ship, and like a mama spider full of eggs on her back, this thing could unleash a swarm of 800 troops. That means that each carried more than an entire clone battalion. That's a total of 6,400 jetpack sporting Mandalorians that could be moved from the Kandosi to any target in a single wave. And of course, they could shuttle back and forth during major offensives, since there was a total of 30,000 troops on board each Kandosi. So all of them could be transported with these 8 Shadlars, making 5 trips each, meaning you could be resupplying certain areas, or choosing 40 different targets to drop more than a battalion on, exiting via these hangars below on some models, while others have it on these long sections up top, open on each end. The difference can easily be explained as different variants over the years. Neither form provides great cover and rapid deployment, as you can't hit them as they exit when facing dead on, and when on the ventral side they could peel out each way or continue straight back to circle around, or just drop down right on top of the target, using the massive double-shielded Kandosi to escort them all the way up, absorbing whatever defenses the enemy might have, and unleashing the fighters and transports to make that final short trip down to the surface of the planet, station, or ship. You can see why when all of this is considered, it's not underpowered at all, and we haven't even looked at how effective the super heavy concussion missile batteries are. We'll see that when we look at the history. The crew was 10,000 in number, so a total of 40k is about 4 times the Venator, but a lot closer to the ISD. And since these Mandos were used to more Spartan quarters, you could pack them in a lot closer. And you can see why the Mandalorians of this era, with proper militaries and huge numbers, were such an overwhelming force for most of the galaxy. While the cargo capacity of 45,000 tons meant every single Mando on board could have a whole can-do back to enjoy for the length of the campaign. The only obvious issue to point out is that some of these guns are blocked by its own structures, reducing some of the forward-facing fire from the cannons, but they were expecting to make this up with a barrage of missiles coming from the bow and this entire lower protruding superstructure. These cannons are canted and could fire forward and back, while you might expect these ones up top to be ion weaponry, with the point defense lasers and anti-starfighter roll scattered across various surfaces. As for their history, the Mandalorian Wars would bring the full might of their fleets against the Republic in 3964 BBY, starting with the Battle of Vanquo. But many point to the Crusader raids that started in 3976 and kept ramping up until they had to be opposed by the Jedi-led Republic military. Their fleets were anchored by the powerful Kandosis, along with the Krymud-type battleship, Jahave-Ir-type assault ship, dungeon ships, Q-carriers, and Taroch-type gunships. These were used to blitz Vanquo, easily overwhelming them with these powerful capital ships and an insane number of troops that could be rapidly transported. And then this tactic was seen on Tarsus, though this fight was more difficult, requiring a three-pronged defensive that eventually did result in a valuable addition to the growing empire of Mandalore the Ultimate. His Neo-Crusaders were operating from an HQ established on the frozen world of Jebel, and they quickly set sights on Sirocco. This world had full member status in the Republic, and this battle would forever change the relationship between the Mandalorians and the rest of the galactic community. The Jedi and Republic forces would lead Battle Group Sirocco from the Inexpugnable class tactical command ship named Courageous, forming a blockade with hammerheads, forays, and Aurok starfighters. When the Mando force did pop out of hyperspace, confirming their intel, they saw that the Kandosis immediately opened with a full volley of missiles. All power was directed to the forward shields. They showed a previously unknown capability. As the missiles raced toward the Republic capital ship, they abruptly changed direction and within seconds were striking the surface of Sirocco. Their plan was to cut off all the ground reinforcements, as the Republic was planning to cycle out forces in the blockade as the space battle raged on. They saw the mushroom clouds forming all across the planet. These were not conventional weapons, but nuclear warheads that had turned the Republic bases and major cities into massive glass craters. Only 8 ships would be able to make it off-world and evacuate the fallout. As the battle continued, the Republic fleet would be pursued into deep space, and the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders showed just how well they had perfected ship boarding. Going right for the head, the flagship of Admiral Karath was swarmed by Mando transports, and now close-quarters combat skills would determine the outcome of this first official battle between these two powerful factions. The Courageous was still trying to flee, as the Mandos were clearing decks, and the crew was making desperate attempts to get away via escape pods. Karath tried to make a last stand with Jedi allies and elite troops, but eventually they were surrounded in the brig. Luckily for them, their Jedi helped use the Force to create an opening, and these last defenders narrowly escaped with their lives. With this overwhelming victory motivating them, the Mandalorians would push all the way to the core and strike fear into all the elites on Coruscant, the ancient and original homeworld of the Mandalorian ancestors. But eventually, the might of this ship would have to be turned against their own HQ on Jebel, when Cassus Fett was faced with stopping the Rakul Plague, a disease engineered by an ancient Sith Lord Karnus Mur. It would kill over 60 million on Taurus and 1 million Mandalorians on Jebel before Fett gave the order to glass this world and contain the plague. With the bombardment of nukes and the resulting fallout, this threat to the Mandos was finally stopped. Over the next 3,000 years, the Mandalorians' grasp on the galaxy would slowly fade, due to responses by the Jedi, Republic, and betrayals from their Sith allies, but mostly from the fracturing within their own clans, something they would never fully recover from. And while the might of the Mando fleets was gone, the memory of the Kandosi would go on to influence the dreadnought-class heavy cruiser, manufactured by their old enemy, Rendili, but also the Mandel Motors creation, the Crusader-class corvette. As for behind-the-scenes facts, according to the Knights of the Old Republic campaign guide, a notable flaw in their design was that their hyperspace navigation systems could be crippled by a strategically placed charge in the rear, which must have been tricky to pull off when the double shields were activated. There's a rich modding community out there that involves this craft, and even a fan-made Kandosi 2. It's really interesting. If you want to check it out, links to all these sources are in the description, while most of this info comes from the Knights of the Old Republic comic series, Essential Guide to Warfare, and Dreadnoughts of Rendili. Likes, comments, and shares are the best way to help me out. Subscribe if you want to see more. But most important of all, remember, the greatest source of nightmare fuel in the galaxy is nuclear-powered Mandos. And the Force will be with you. Always.